Hey guys! This is part 6 of What If Naruto Was Raised and Trained by the Toads. Hit like and subscribe if you like this one, and also please check the author in the description. Let's start! Chapter 21. The tension in the room was palpable, not that it fazed the 6 world leaders sitting in an elongated semicircle in the middle of it. The only one not sitting at the single curved table was Mifune, who sat off to the side at his own, much smaller table. As the neutral host of the proceedings, it made sense, and as the host, it was his duty to broach the topic of why the 5 Kage were meeting in the first place. As a neutral country, the land of iron welcomes you all, and while we have not heard much of this Akatsuki organization, I assume that it is a concern to all of you. It would certainly explain why both Lord Raikage and Lady Hokage called for a meeting. Perhaps they can tell us why this meeting became necessary. Tsunade stood up at the same moment as the Raikage, and the bodyguards tensed in the balcony as the 2 hidden village leaders stared each other down. After a second, the Raikage blustered forward, and Tsunade sat back down, willing herself to let it slide. Akatsuki captured the Hidden Cloud's second jinchuriki very recently. To be perfectly tactless, our spies have informed us that there is only one jinchuriki left to the hidden villages as a whole. Akatsuki must be stopped. The bodyguards twitched before settling down again once they realized that the Raikage's angry pounding was just that, and posed no threat to anyone but the desk in front of him. Both bodyguards and Kages alike looked around for any clues as to which village still had their tailed beast. Seeing the other Kages and bodyguards doing the same thing, there was only one conclusion to draw. And it was Mifune who drew it first. And I see that the one village with a tailed beast left is the only one not in attendance. Should we postpone until my messengers can reach the hidden waterfall? The other Kages almost groaned at the thought of spending any more time in the land of iron than necessary, but the Raikage actually grinned. That won't be necessary, or possible. Akatsuki did attack the hidden waterfall to get the 7 tails, and they succeeded in wiping the village off the face of the map, though it remains so hidden I doubt anyone has really noticed yet. If there had been more people present, the Raikage's announcement would have no doubt sent murmurs and whisperings rippling throughout the room. As it was, the other Kage and their bodyguards settled for wearing various expressions of surprise and horror. This is a most disturbing development, said the Tsuchikage, hand raised to his chin in thought. And I don't suppose you'll tell us how you've come to know of this attack? Information was power in the ninja world, and brash, young people like the Raikage showed off their power on a regular basis. So the wizened old man wasn't all that surprised when the muscle-bound Kage tipped his hand. I know because 2 survivors came to my village, seeking refuge. One of them was the jinchuriki herself. With a dramatic flourish, the Raikage pointed up to the banner behind him, which bore the kanji for lightning. Fu stuck her head out from behind the cloth and waved at the assembled ninja below with a small smile on her face. Today, the world shall know pain, and through it, peace. Pain turned towards the other 8 members of Akatsuki assembled before him, in addition to Orochimaru's squad. Almost every member of Akatsuki had followers on their payroll, though Orochimaru was the only one who had any that were worth something in a fight. We shall go in, defeat the 5 Kage, and secure the jinchuriki. Where the fuck is Zetsu? Asked Hidan, with his usual amount of tact. Did the pansy chicken out of a good fight? Which Zetsu are you referring to? Asked Sasori sarcastically. Regardless, he's both inside already, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Naruto got up from his meditative position. There's a whole lot of samurai on the lower floors, but the only people up top are the Kage and their bodyguards. There don't appear to be any barriers, but I've been wrong before. Pain nodded at the members of Akatsuki, and they all followed him towards the large meeting hall of the Kage. As they all leapt through the trees, Naruto dropped back next to Kisame. He's here. Outside the building. On this path, we'll barely miss him. Kisame's sharp-toothed smile widened to nightmarish proportions as he veered off course to intercept a target he wanted to fight. The rest of Akatsuki continued onward to a fight that would lead to peace, destruction, or both. Sasuke leaned up against the tree, keeping a clear line of sight with the large building where the meeting was taking place. He had been told to not enter the building, as the last thing a peace negotiation needed was for the Hokage to find out that the Hidden Cloud source was one of her own missing ninja. If Akatsuki attacked, the building would likely not be in mint condition for long. When the building began to explode, Sasuke would move in, and hope he wasn't too late to find a member of Akatsuki. Now that his eyes were fully healed, his basic Sharingan took next to no chakra to maintain, and it was only the fact that he had them active that he managed to notice the attack. He leapt to the side as the large shark, made entirely of water, crashed down on where he had been standing. Jumping higher up into the branches of the trees, Sasuke began to jump towards the Kage's summit building. Water style, flying fish. Sasuke looked over his shoulder to see another watery fish flying behind him, slowly gaining ground. His hand lit up with a shriek of lightning, and he turned around midair to face the shark. Chidori mine! The ball of lightning simply stopped where it was, and exploded when the shark touched it. The water style fell to the ground like rain, and Sasuke whipped out his sword to block the incoming strike. He was swatted down to the ground as if his katana had been used to try and stop a building from crushing him, only it was even less effective. Sasuke crawled out of the crater in the snow he had made, and looked upon the strangest Akatsuki member he had seen, perhaps with the exception of Zetsu. He was a good 6 feet tall, and carried a sword covered in bandages that might have been as tall as he was, but the strange part was his blue skin, and the gills that seemed to be a part of his cheeks. Sasuke also noticed the Akatsuki cloak he wore, and he enviously noted that it was likely much warmer than his own cloak. "You know, usually I'm the one killing my teammates," said the shark man, and Sasuke noted the pointed teeth. "Now that you've killed Itachi, I get a chance to see what avenging a fallen comrade feels like. Care to help me experience that, Amaterasu?" Sasuke did not feel like helping this Akatsuki member get revenge for the only living Uchiha's older brother. And he didn't waste any time as his eternal Mangekyo Sharingan spun to life and shot black flames as hot as the sun. The shark just brought up his sword like a large shield, and the black fire of Amaterasu hit the blade. Sasuke's Sharingan widened as the black fire that was able to burn for 7 days in a heavy downpour was simply sucked into the sword, which seemed to grow a bit larger. The swordsman grinned, and it was then that Sasuke realized that he was fighting another one of the 7 ninja swordsmen of the Bloody Mist village. Years ago, he had had a run-in with Zabuza, and if it hadn't have been for Kakashi, he would have died then and there. Now he was fighting someone just as strong, if not stronger, alone. "Samahata and I are in agreement. Your fire isn't nearly as strong as Itachi's," said the Akatsuki swordsman. "But I guess that just means I can feel a bit nostalgic while I tear you to shreds. I'm Kisame Hashigaki, and my blade and I are going to eat you alive." Sasuke brought up his sword, and blue lightning shrieked down the blade as he ran at Kisame. "Fancy yourself a swordsman? Let me show you how wrong you are," shouted Kisame as he leapt to the challenge. Their swords clashed, but Sasuke was ready for Samahata's bulk this time, and his sword simply rolled away. Sasuke twirled his sword around, and sliced Kisame across the face as he continued past the legendary swordsman. Sasuke grinned as he turned to face the bleeding swordsman, but he was annoyed to see that his attack had only left a tiny scratch on the Akatsuki member's cheek. It would have been more effective, but Sasuke's Sharingan had noticed his opponent's sword eat the lightning chakra right off his own blade. The feeling was only annoyance though, which was infinitely superior to the burning pain that shot up his leg a second later. Looking down, Sasuke saw the mess that used to be the back of his calf. "Unlike your pathetic excuse for a sword, Samahata only needs a moment of contact to cripple its prey," bragged Kisame, swinging Samahata over his shoulder confidently. Sasuke glared at the Akatsuki member, and the Sharingan in his left eye spun wildly. Kisame looked up in confusion as the sky became blood red, and the clouds began to move backwards across the sea of red. He looked down in pain and shock at his right hand, which still clutched Samahata as it fell to the ground. Kisame turned to look at Sasuke, who had moved without Kisame even seeing a blur, as he cut off the legendary swordsman's hand. "You might be the better swordsman, but this is my world now," said Sasuke as he stood up slowly. Kisame howled in pain as another sword impaled him from behind. Looking over his shoulder, Kisame saw another Sasuke clutching the sword behind him. Kisame felt a familiar presence crawling up his arm from where his hand had been cut off, and he closed his eyes, grunting as even more swords stabbed through him. Kisame opened his eyes just in time to swat Sasuke away with Samahata as the Uchiha leapt at him for the finishing blow. Breathing heavily, Kisame glared at the Uchiha. "So sorry, but your genjutsu is nowhere near Itachi's level. It's plenty god, but my partner is always there to break me out of a nasty genjutsu." Sasuke took notice of Samahata's hilt, which had several blue spikes shooting out of it to pierce Kisame's hand. Injecting its chakra directly into Kisame had been enough to snap him out of the imperfect Tsukiyomi. Sasuke looked up to the building where the 5 Kage were meeting without any warning of the organization of terrorists that were heading there at the moment. He had to warn them somehow, and he could only think of a few attacks big enough to get their attention. So he used one of them as Kisame ran at him to avenge Itachi, which was still a strange concept to him. He had never really thought that his murdering brother could actually become close enough to someone that they would want to avenge him, though it made sense that if he did, it would be a fellow monster like Kisame. Samehada was brought down hard on Sasuke, but it was stopped by glowing purple ribs. They cracked a bit, but repaired themselves as Susanoo roared to life with an explosion of purple chakra. The blast sent Kisame hurtling back, and he skidded to a stop to look up at the towering spectral warrior. It had taken a good deal of training, and he was still unable to clothe his Susanoo in armor like Itachi's. Still, his Susanoo loosed an arrow at Kisame, who barely had time to bring up Samehada and deflect it. Even then, the arrow pierced the ground barely a foot from where Kisame stood. "Good, it's only interesting when the prey fights back," said Kisame, a sick grin covering his face. Samehada's hilt bent like a snake and wound its way up Kisame's arm as it seemed to fuse with his skin. He held his hands up in a simple sign and reared his head back. Kisame's cheeks swelled to insane proportions before he opened his mouth and spat out a mind-staggering amount of water. Sasuke's Susanoo flailed uselessly in the watery dome as it was hit from all sides in quick succession. Kisame took a moment's pause to let Sasuke take in his new, even more shark-like form. "Water style, water prison shark dance. All that's left is to play with my food." The 5 Kage summit had burst into a small uproar at the Raikage's possession of the last free jinchuriki, and everyone present seemed insulted and furious, with the sole exception of the Raikage and his entourage. "What right do you have to the 7 tails?" shouted the Tsuchikage, only raising his voice to be heard over the din. His question went unanswered in the general chaos of the moment, however, and all the bodyguards present were tightening their grips on their weapons, ready to defend their leaders at a moment's notice. Enough! They were saved the trouble by Mifune, who had unsheathed his sword so quickly it created a large gust of wind. Before the bodyguards could react, the katana was resting once more in its sheath, and Mifune sat back down. "Now, while you are in my land, this will be an orderly and peaceable summit." He turned to face the Raikage. "Now, Lord Raikage, I will ask you what I'm sure we are all thinking. How did you come across the 7 tails jinchuriki?" The Raikage sighed in relief at the subsidence of yelling. "The jinchuriki was brought to our village after the destruction of her own by a wandering ninja, who had apparently set out to protect her from Akatsuki, and only arrived just in the nick of time." Tsunade's eyes widened as a ninja that fit the description jumped to the front of her mind, vowing to stop Akatsuki with or without the hidden leaf. Her suspicions and fears were confirmed when the Raikage answered the Kazekage's query. "Who was this ninja, Sasuke Uchiha?" said the Raikage calmly. Every ninja was aware of the last Uchiha, and the repercussions of one of the Hidden Leaf's founding clans potentially relocating to the Hidden Cloud. While one Uchiha wouldn't usually be a big deal, it became a big deal when the entire clan was comprised of one member. Kakashi in particular was rattled by his student's defection. It was clear that without Mifune's harsh gaze, the room would descend back into the clamor it had just left. In fact, no one could think of a way to voice an objection without making the problem worse. As the awkward silence dragged on for painful seconds, a messenger entered the room, bowing respectfully to Mifune. "Sir, there is a large sphere of water and large purple man trapped within outside." Before anyone else could react, the Mizukage and her sole bodyguard were on their feet. The other bodyguards leapt into action at the swordsman's action, and the banners fell to the floor. "Kisame Hashigaki," said Chojuro, both terrified of fighting a living legend who had reportedly killed the previous Mizukage and impressed with himself for moving so quickly upon recognizing the threat. Tsunade was the next to speak up, standing up to be seen above Kakashi and Tenzo. "I think we all know that Akatsuki somehow knows that we have the last jinchuriki, and they're coming for her," she said, gesturing to Fu, who was the only one still sitting in the balcony. Then the conversation was cut short as the roof exploded. Luckily, all the shrapnel had managed to hit all around Fu without even scratching the jinchuriki herself. The Tsuchikage looked up at the white birds hovering above the newly created opening in shock. "Deidara." Just then, the doors burst pen, and a soul samurai ran in, followed by a triple-bladed scythe that flew through the air behind him. It came down to impale him, but was stopped by Mifune's blade, which defended his samurai and sent the weapon flying back. "Damn it, I was going for a perfect record." "Oh well. Kakuzu, how many did you get?" said Hidan as he caught his scythe out of midair and casually strolled into the room, along with the rest of Akatsuki. "They weren't worth anything, so I left the killing to you. The big game is at the top," said Kakuzu as Naruto leapt down to join the other Earthbound Akatsuki members. Konan and Deidara continued to hover above the meeting room. "Orochimaru!" shouted Tsunade angrily. Her attention was diverted, however, when Tenzo stabbed Kakashi in the back. "Tenzo, what are you doing? I guess the copy ninja isn't that great at spotting a copy, is he?" said Tenzo, as his skin slowly paled to a ghostly white. His brown hair also changed to a light green, and his clothes seemed to melt into an equally white skin. "It's been a while since I've gone undercover for so long, but that wood style user really boosted my strength." The world leaders watched, suddenly cautious of their own bodyguards, as Zetsu jumped back to the group of Akatsuki, where a completely black version of him rose out of the ground, and they fused together. Tsunade knelt down to heal Kakashi, and he was up in seconds, though he was clearly still injured. Battlefield trauma was her forte after all. The Kage stood by, ready to attack at a moment's notice, as Akatsuki parted to let a tall man with orange hair and numerous piercings walk forward. He fit the description of pain that Jiraiya had given, though Akatsuki's deference to him was a dead giveaway as to his status as Akatsuki's leader. "Akatsuki will be taking the jinchuriki," he said matter-of-factly. "The only question is, how much pain will you suffer before we do?" The Raikage decided to try and swipe Pain's head off then and there, but he was stopped dead in his tracks and launched back the way he came just as quickly. A lot then. The Tsuchikage hadn't stuck around long after that. The oldest Kage had a score to settle, and sure enough, Deidara pursued him into the air. Once he had gotten high enough to ensure that he wouldn't accidentally vaporize the leaders of the world's most powerful countries by accident, he turned to face his wayward protege. "You know, all those times I had hired Akatsuki, I honestly didn't know you had joined them. By the time I found out, Akatsuki had stopped taking jobs. What can I say? World domination requires a good deal of our attention, yeah," replied Deidara. She tossed out a small clay figure, and jumped off of her current bird as it flew towards the Tsuchikage. Deidara was enveloped in a cloud of smoke as the clay beast was trapped within a transparent cube. The white clay hawk tried to explode, but was atomized by Inoki's feared dust style. The floating man looked at Deidara's latest piece emerged from the smoke that had obscured it. A large clay serpent coiled around in the sky, suspended by large clay wings. Deidara stood atop the head of the long and skinny dragon with a smile on her face. "Well, old man, is this a waste of time?" The serpentine dragon flew through the air gracefully, dodging the cube that came threatened to vaporize it, and fired a smaller dragon out of its mouth as its tail grew shorter. The dragon flew at the Tsuchikage, who deftly flew out of the way. He was unprepared, however, when the dragon swooped around to follow him, even as Deidara launched another. Stuck between the two, Inoki stopped midair and slammed his hands together. The dragons exploded upon contact, but when the smoke cleared, the Tsuchikage was unharmed, covered by a smoking layer of solid rock. Deidara glared at the old man as his golem armor fell off. Her C2 dragon lost another segment of its tail as it pulled back its mighty wings. Small bits began to bulge from the clay creation, and they came flying out as a hail of clay insects when the dragon flapped its wings toward the Tsuchikage. Looking onward at the mass of exploding insects propelled toward him by a large gust of wind, Inoki's eyes narrowed as he clapped his hands together. When he opened them, he held a glowing rectangle between his hands that was incredibly thin. As he launched it forward, his dust style grew to enormous proportions and turned all of the miniature bombs into dust as they tried to pass through. It wasn't aerodynamic enough to cross the distance required to hit Deidara and end the fight, though. "I would have taught you the dust style, you know," he shouted across the gap to his former successor. "Just as Mew taught it to me. You were to be the Tsuchikage after me. And then you betrayed my trust. Oh, shove it, yeah. My art is all I need. And it's 100, no, 1,000 times better than your pathetic dust style." Deidara lowered her hand into her clay pouch and began to chew on the white sculpting material as her dragon launched a particularly fat and fast dragon from its mouth. "Such a shame to waste your potential," muttered the Tsuchikage, before raising his head to glare at Deidara. "But I'll end it here. Light and boulder technique." His weight decreased even further by the same technique that enabled him to fly. Inoki shot forward, faster than the smaller dragon could react. With his increased speed, he delivered a punch to send his former student hurtling to the ground below. However, Deidara's left hand came up and caught his wrist as his fist touched her abdomen. The renegade bomber, however, remained unmoved by his punch. "Wow, you might hit fast, but you lose the force behind your punches too, yeah. It might not have been a big deal when you were young enough to still hit hard, but now you're just a feeble old man." The mouth on Deidara's right hand opened up and spat out a small bat, ready to explode. Reacting quickly, the Tsuchikage lowered his other hand to touch the massive dragon's head. Weighted boulder technique. Its weight increased several hundredfold. The massive clay dragon fell to the ground like a ton of bricks, leaving the bat to detonate uselessly several hundred feet above them. Her visible eye widening in shock, Deidara released its Tsuchikage and jumped off her fallen creation at the last second. She knew the old man had to keep contact with the target, and quickly detonated the large dragon. The explosion large enough to damage the meeting hall, but if it meant killing the Tsuchikage, she didn't care. You know, replacing myself with a rock clone on such short notice like that is bad for my back. Deidara whirled around to see the Tsuchikage hovering behind her, one hand resting on his lower back. With a glare, the two resumed their exploding aerial dance, and Deidara wondered idly if she had at least destroyed the Kazekage's stupid hat. The fighting had been rather small scale in the beginning, as either side breaking out big attacks would result in friendly fire. In that regard, Deidara's dragon blowing up a good portion of the building was a blessing in disguise for both sides. It separated them all into smaller groups, where they could more safely use their better techniques. You remind me of the first leaf ninja I ever fought, said Kakuzu, glaring at the voluptuous Hokage in front of him. Well, let me show you what a competent leaf ninja can do to an enemy of her village, said Tsunade, cracking her neck. She was a bit surprised by the masked Akatsuki member's angry response to her words. You won't even hold a candle to his strength, he said angrily. I might even indulge in Hidan's favorite pastime here. I'm not sure I can resist the chance to end his entire clan. Wait, who was this ninja you fought? Asked Tsunade, ready to attack the moment he confirmed or denied her suspicions. Of course he wouldn't mention me, said Kakuzu, his voice dripping with spite and sarcasm. After I lost to the first Hokage, I was banished from my village. I stole the earth grudge fear before I left and exacted my revenge on those who had wronged me. But your grandfather, the man who ruined my life, was always too strong, so I'll have to settle for killing his useless excuse of a granddaughter. Tsunade roared in anger as she ran at Kakuzu, fists reared back to send him flying to the hidden sand village. To his credit, Kakuzu simply stood there as his skin darkened. The punch collided, and Kakuzu doubled over in pain as he felt several ribs break, gasping at the force of the blow. Perhaps Tsunade wasn't quite weaker than the first Hokage had been. Still, his earth spear technique absorbed most of the force, and he was conscious enough to have one of his hearts fire a blast of wind through his Akatsuki cloak to hit the fifth Hokage in the head. Tsunade was sent hurtling back by the blast, and the wind shredded her face. Kakuzu stood up, placing a hand on his wounded stomach, and looked for the now headless granddaughter of his most hated enemy. And Tsunade looked back, unchanged save for the tattoos spreading out across her body from the former location of the diamond mark on her forehead. I might not be my grandfather, and it's true that I can't use the wood style. But I am still the Hokage, and I refuse to be underestimated. Kakuzu decided to stop underestimating his foe as he discarded his damaged Akatsuki cloak. Grunting in pain as his 4 extra hearts tore their way out of his back, Kakuzu regained his composure once his back finished stitching itself back together. Very well then, he said gruffly through his mask. If you can heal, let's just see how much you can heal at a time. The mouths behind him opened with a loud crack and launched their powerful elements. Tsunade dropped her foot to kick up a wall of stone that used to be a part of the floor to block the attack, and it worked for a second. Then the overwhelming strength of the combined attacks tore the simple rock to pieces. When the blast died down, Kakuzu's eyes widened when he saw Tsunade running at him, flesh only halfway done healing itself. He ducked under the punch, but was given a kick in the face for his trouble. If it weren't for his skill in reattaching limbs, the fight would have been over right then and there. As it was, several threads shot out of his neck to catch his severed head and reattach it to his torso. Tsunade was having none of it, and grabbed the threads with both hands. Using Kakuzu like a mace, she swung his body around, nailing his fire heart. It was a testament to her strength that the blunt force trauma was enough to crush the heart behind the mask. Kakuzu's lightning, wind, and water hearts flew upwards to dodge the body-turned weapon. Firing a beam of lightning at the Hokage to get her to release Kakuzu proved incredibly ineffective. The first female Kage used Kakuzu's body as a shield, and his earth heart took the attack instead, getting destroyed in the process. She did let go of the body though, as the beam showed no signs of stopping. Granted, her drop kicking the wind heart was less than ideal, but by the time she had regained her footing on the shattered floor, Kakuzu's final 2 hearts had re-entered his body. If Kakuzu had been less prideful, he would have readily admitted his mistake in comparing the woman before him to her grandfather. He would fight, not a medic or a woman, but an S-rank threat. Deciding then and there that he wouldn't let his emotions come into play from here on out, Kakuzu cracked his neck, which now connected his body and head. Kakuzu, the Akatsuki member with 5 hearts, said Tsunade, staring down the man she had just identified. You killed ninja under my command. I can't bring them back. I'm the best medic in the world, but even I'm not that good of a medic. But you'll find that the people best able to keep you out of the afterlife are the people best able to send you there as well. And if I have to kill you 5 times? Well, that's just more therapy for me. Chojuro was quite proud of himself. Through all the chaos and explosions, he had managed to stay by the Mizukage's side. Mei Terumi had entrusted him with her safety, and he would be damned before he let her face a member of Akatsuki alone. Still, he had been hoping for an Akatsuki member with a little less terrifying reputation. As if sensing the boy's thoughts, Orochimaru's freakishly long tongue snuck its way out of his mouth and slowly licked his lips. Chojuro shuddered at the man's actions, and the 3 men on around him didn't fill the only legal member of the 7 ninja swordsmen of the Hidden Mist with confidence either. He stopped shaking when he felt the Mizukage's reassuring hand on his shoulder. Chojuro, I can handle myself against this snake. You just handle his little worms. I know you can handle this. Chojuro gulped, but steeled himself for combat with the 2 stoic-looking ninja, and the 1 ninja who looked ready to kill for the legendary sword in Chojuro's hands. Kimimaro, Suigetsu, Jugo, said Orochimaru, addressing his 3 followers. You handle the guppy. I'll take care of the big fish. The white-haired one, apparently named Kimimaro, nodded silently. The massive orange-haired giant next to him seemed more resigned than eager to fight, but his lack of enthusiasm was countered by the shortest ninja's barely checked fervor. Chojuro was honestly surprised that this Suigetsu had contained himself this long. Chojuro was taken aback when Kimimaro removed his shirt, letting it fall around his waist. The reason became clear when a long, white sword rose out from under his skin. Chojuro's confidence actually swelled a bit before he realized what that meant. In a sword fight, he wouldn't be beaten by anyone. He was the current leader of the other, non-existent, members of the 7 swordsmen of the mist. Then he recalled where he had heard of these abilities before. The Kage revolt had been a rallying point for the 4th Mizukage's followers after he had adopted an anti-bloodline stance. While the event's political implications were terrible for the cause, Mei had agreed with the actions themselves. The warlike clan was dangerous, and far too bloodthirsty to operate in any civilized society, and now one of them that had somehow survived the eradication of the Kage clan was standing right in front of Chojuro, holding a sword made out of his own bone in his hand. Sighing in an attempt to calm his frantically beating heart, Chojuro pulsed his chakra through Hiramikari, and the bandages wrapped around the sword exploded off of the steel in a burst of chakra. Suigetsu's eyes lit up at sight of the sword, and despite the Kage's inherent advantage with his bloodline, only one to really seem eager about the fighting was the first to charge at Chojuro. In disbelief of the simple, idiotic attack, Chojuro swung his sword down, and the chakra emitted from the 2 holes at the tip of the massive sword took the form of an even more massive hammer. Chojuro saw the ninja in front of him turn into water right as the hammer crushed him into the floor. The bespectacled ninja was an experienced ninja from the Hidden Mist, and immediately identified the crushed person as a water clone and was immediately on guard. It saved his life when he was able to block the small pellets that Kimimaro had launched at him from his fingertips. Changing the chakra around his sword into a massive fly swatter, he did one better than simply blocking the projectiles, sending them straight back. The 10 fingertip bones were stopped by a wall of water that rose up from the puddle that had been the water clone and absorbed the bullets of bone. The clone then reformed, wearing a fearsome grin with sharpened teeth. Opening his mouth, Suigetsu spit the bits of bone out, which was something water clones couldn't do. Jumping away as Suigetsu smashed the ground where he had been standing with a strangely proportioned fist, Chojuro was forced to reevaluate his opponents. Kimimaro was clearly a Kage, which meant he had a unique control over his skeleton. It could supposedly harden to become stronger than the strongest armor, or form nearly indestructible weapons. If Suigetsu's ability was what Chojuro thought it was, he was the same little brother of Mangetsu Hozuki, which meant that his older brother had been the previous owner of the same sword Chojuro now wielded. Fighting an opponent who could transform into water at will would be difficult, but he had a plan of sorts. The only unknown was the hulking orange-haired man who had remained silent until now. Kimimaro turned to his companion. He is skilled. If you do not fight, I might have to push myself too far to defeat him. Looking down at the last Kage, Jugo responded calmly. Then don't, he said simply. My devotion to Lord Orochimaru is absolute. I will win here, no matter the cost. And I cannot count on Suigetsu to watch my back. Can I count on you? Suigetsu was indeed doing a wretched job of watching Kimimara's back, charging recklessly at Chojuro, reforming from the splatters of water whenever Chojuro cut him in half. Jugo sighed in resignation. Very well then, he said, as flaming red marks crawled across his skin, slowly covering his whole body. Whatever Jugo could do, Chojuro had a feeling he would find out soon. You know, it isn't nice to take advantage of our friendship like that. Kind of makes me mad. No, furious is the right word, and when I get furious, I just want to kill things. Grinning as his friend's bloodthirsty alternate personality slowly surfaced, Kimimaro pointed to Chojuro, who was still trying to keep his distance from the watery Hozuki who wanted his sword. Then kill him. A mad grin spread across Jugo's face as the red marks faded to a light gray. His eyes now a deranged-looking black and gold, Jugo began to laugh maniacally. I'm going to kill you! He shouted as he ran towards Chojuro, sped up by the chakra jets affixed to his back. Bringing up Hiramikari to block the punch, Chojuro was nevertheless sent hurtling along the ground from the sheer power behind Jugo's hit. Skidding to a stop, he was barely able to get Hiramikari in time to block Kimimaro's straight stab. The bone sword was impressive, and almost got through the hole in the legendary sword's tip to hit Chojuro. Twisting his sword to dislodge the bone blade from Kimimaro's hand, Chojuro kicked out to nail Suigetsu in midair. A bone sprung out of Kimimaro's other palm, and he thrust it toward Chojuro's prone form. Suigetsu reformed and grabbed a hold of Chojuro's ankle, which was still stuck in Suigetsu's stomach. In his rage, though, Jugo smashed down on Chojuro at that same moment. The explosion or debris in floor tiles was actually enough to send Chojuro through the floor to the level below. When the dust cleared, Chojuro stood, still shaking, holding a dented Hiramikari above his head. Jugo, Kimimaro, and Suigetsu jumped down to surround him, and Chojuro hoped that Lady Mizukage was having better luck than he was. Orochimaru stood facing the Mizukage, who stared back unafraid. Sorry, but you're not really my type, a tad too old for my tastes, said Mei, a small grin tugging at her lips. Kukuku, laughed Orochimaru, as he licked his lips. I'm afraid you'll have to put up with me for a bit longer. Strength, chakra reserves, and 2 bloodlines, what more could I ask for in a body? Not waiting to see what the rogue Sannin was talking about, Mei began to run through hand seals. Water style, hyper cutter. Mei spit out a super concentrated stream of water that could cut through steel. Orochimaru dodged the blast of water by slithering along the ground on his stomach like the snakes he summoned. Cutting off her stream of water when it became clear that Orochimaru wasn't going to get hit so easily. The moment the water stopped, Orochimaru turned to slither towards the Mizukage. Hidden shadow snake hands. Orochimaru lifted his hand, and several large pythons shot out of his sleeves to wrap themselves around the Mizukage. The speed of the attack took her by surprise, though it made sense considering the former Leaf Ninja's legendary status. Orochimaru's legs reformed from the more snake-like blur as he sank to a stop in front of her. Now then, your body is mine. Smirking seductively, the Mizukage breathed out a fine mist of acid. Orochimaru's skin began to melt off his body, and the same happened to the snakes wrapped around her. Jumping away from the Sannin, who was screaming in pain as his body melted, she grinned in victory. I'm sorry, I'm simply not into older men. She turned away to go help Chojuro with his own fight, but whirled around when Orochimaru's screaming turned to laughter. The mouth on the Akatsuki member's deformed face opened wide, and another body crawled out, without so much as a scratch. You won't be rid of me that easily. I won't take no for an answer. Your body will be mine. Lava release. Lava globs. Mei spat out several globules of lava at Orochimaru, who ran through his own hand seals. Wind style. Great breakthrough. The massive blast of wind that Orochimaru shot out of his palm was enough to turn the lava balls into minuscule bits of hot rock that cooled into a rain of pebbles by the time they landed around Orochimaru. Grinning insanely, the snake summoner launched another blast of blunt air at the Mizukage. It sent her flying back towards the wall. Twisting around midair, the Mizukage sprung off of the wall to shoot towards the pale-skinned Sannin. Water style, water dragon bullet. Using her own velocity to make the water dragon even faster, the Mizukage's technique bore down on Orochimaru. A cloud of smoke enveloped him before the water could crash over the snake summoner. When the water collided with the Sannin and dispersed the smoke, Orochimaru had been replaced by a large purple snake. The snake opened its mouth to hiss at the Mizukage, and the rogue Sannin stepped out of the fanged reptile's mouth. You'll need to try harder than that if you want to beat me, or you could just give up. Kukuku. Chapter 22. Hello? Temari swung her fan once more, chopping the snow-white Akatsuki member into tiny pieces with blades of wind sharp enough to cut steel. It was ultimately useless though, as more clones rose up from the ground, all of them wearing a completely ridiculous grin. "Will you just stay dead?" shouted Temari as she smashed a Zetsu clone upside the head with her war fan. Folded up, the wind-creating fan made an incredibly effective club, something Temari used to great effect whenever a Zetsu clone got too close. Ebizo was holding his own against the horde of white, using a fishing pole of all things to keep the clones at bay. Oddly enough, the clones of Zetsu were treating it like a deadly weapon and keeping their distance. The ability to produce clones on this scale is an impressive ability, but I doubt it is enough to make him an S-rank ninja, said Ebizo, as he wielded his fishing pole as a rapier to smack several Zetsu clones. Oddly enough, as soon as the flexible bit of wood hit them, the clones stopped whatever they were doing and stood completely still. It was the genjutsu touch that had made Ebizo feared during the war as one of the premier genjutsu experts in the world. One touch was enough to trap his opponent in a false world, often with no idea that they had been placed under a genjutsu. We need to be on guard for his true power. Temari swung her fan, cutting down the entranced Zetsu clones like blades of grass, as she grunted in agreement. If he can do anything else, he certainly isn't in any hurry to do anything with it. True enough, ever since Zetsu had separated them from Gaara in the explosion, he had done little but send clones of himself en masse. As soon as she turned around to kill the clones that Ebizo had incapacitated though, a white Zetsu clone jumped out of the ground from behind her and wrapped large white spines around her. Temari could feel her chakra being drained by the white Zetsu clone as she struggled to get away. Luckily, Ebizo noticed, and sent Zetsu stumbling away in a genjutsu-induced stupor. "Thanks," said Temari before returning the favor by smashing in a Zetsu's face over Ebizo's shoulder. This clone was different however, and exploded in a cloud of smoke. With all the Zetsu clones around, this was a debilitating problem. Luckily, one did not live over 80 years in the land of wind without learning some wind-style techniques. Wind-style, smoke clearing. The particular technique Ebizo used was specifically designed to blow away smoke from smoke bombs. It wouldn't knock over a teacup, let alone harm an opponent, but it used up next to no chakra. Looking around frantically as he removed the cognitive functions of several Zetsu clones who had tried to get in close and looked around for Temari, worried that she had been taken out while the smoke was up. Ebizo was surprised for a moment when he saw two copies of Temari facing off against each other with the war fan stuck into the ground between them. For a moment he wondered how to tell which one was the real one, before his decades of experience with the chakra system kicked in automatically. Concentrating on the chakra system of the Kazekage's sister, Ebizo's eyes widened in shock. "Impossible, your chakra. It's exactly the same." This news took Temari off guard, though both copies reacted the exact same way. "Damn it, you'll need to ask me something only the real me would know," shouted both versions of Temari in unison. Luckily for Ebizo, the other copies of Zetsu seemed to be content to watch the drama in front of them unfold, giving him time to concoct a plan to tell the real Temari from the transformed Zetsu. "Very well then, what was the name of your older brother?" asked Ebizo calmly. He noticed as one of the two copies of Temari tightened her fists in anguish, but the other one turned to him in anger. "My older brother was Kankuro. His death is the reason I want to get revenge on Akatsuki." The other copy of Temari looked at Ebizo in horror as he slowly turned to her. "Wait, Ebizo. They must have stolen that information with a spy, or something," she pleaded, holding up her hands as the elderly ninja whipped out his fishing pole. "You have to believe me, he's the imposter." Ebizo brought up his fishing pole, prepared to send the obvious fake into a genjutsu. The fishing pole shot out to the side, the line flying out and digging into the other Temari's neck. One sharp tug later, and the Temari that had answered his question stumbled towards him in shock and received a sharp tap on the forehead to activate the genjutsu. "You could never talk about a sibling's death so casually," explained Ebizo calmly as the real Temari regained her composure. "If you were able to, I wouldn't want to fight alongside you anyway. Now then, we should clear this up and protect the Kazekage." Genjutsu, field of flames. Nothing seemed to happen for the second after Ebizo completed his hand seals, save for the Zetsu clones drawing closer now that their ploy had failed. Then they all collapsed on the ground, writhing in pain as their bodies were burned away by imaginary fires. Temari retrieved her fan and drew a bloody thumb across the durable fabric. In a puff of smoke, a scythe-wielding weasel with an eye patch appeared alongside a glowing blue lantern. A swing of her war fan sent the weasel flying around the room, chopping the Zetsu army to pieces. Temari was a bit winded by the chakra cost of summoning, which is why she hadn't used that technique at the beginning of the fight. However, anything was worth the cost if it meant protecting her younger brother. Well. Ebizo and Temari looked up to the ceiling as a deep voice resounded through the chamber. It appears your little army ploy failed spectacularly. I guess I'll handle this. Fine, we'll do this the old-fashioned way. The two-tone man half-fused with the ceiling berated himself before shooting several wooden spikes out of the ceiling around him in an attempt to impale the sand ninja below him. As Kazekage, I won't allow myself to lose again, said Gaara as he faced down the hunched-over Akatsuki member before him. The man's face was obscured by a thick bandana, but the voice was obviously distorted by something. I've heard it all before, he responded in a deep voice. The third said something similar before I killed him. And I imagine that your own father would have done the same if I had taken a more direct approach with him. As it was, the third Hokage got to him before my poison could do its job, but the end result was the same. Gaara's ringed eyes narrowed at the Akatsuki member's words. What interest do you have in the Kazekage? I am Sasori of the Red Sand, famed puppeteer of the village you now rule over. I am the killer of the third Kazekage, who has joined my collection. Sasori's hand slowly reached up to his mouth to uncover a demented segmented grin. The bits of the mouth moved separately, and the eerie clacking noise would have made anyone less stoic than Gaara shudder. And I had plans to add the fourth Kazekage to my collection. His foolish invasion of the hidden leaf saved me time, though I was lucky to get a hold of the body in time. Now you will be my third Kazekage. Gaara's hand moved instinctively to stop the barrage of Saban that emerged from Sasori's mouth. The sand became so saturated with Saban that by the end of the bombardment, the needles were bouncing off of themselves rather than being caught in the sand. One large pulse of the wall of sand sent the Saban hurtling back at Sasori, albeit with a much lower standard of accuracy. The Akatsuki member simply stood there as the needles embedded themselves into his cloak. Sasori seemed to not notice his new resemblance to a pincushion, and Gaara was almost afraid of the answer for what he was about to ask. What is this collection? I am a puppeteer, said Sasori simply as he raised his left arm. The large cylinder detached itself from the rest of his arm and flew towards Gaara. Sand reached out to grab the projectile, and succeeded. The smaller cylinders embedded inside the large hand substitute shot out in a burst of pressure. It would have likely been difficult to dodge the canisters full of Saban, but they were effectively contained by the Kazekage's sand. For your crimes against the village hidden in the sand, I, the fifth Kazekage, will be your executioner. With that said, Gaara's sand shot forward in a massive wave as the Kazekage rose his arms as if beckoning it forth. Sasori was many things, but puppeteers were not very mobile as a general rule of thumb, and there was no way he could simply dodge the enormous wave of sand even if he had placed more effort into the art of dodging. The tsunami of sand formed a large dome around Sasori, before compacting into a small ball around half the size. The sand fell away to reveal Sasori's body, which was surprisingly not a mangled ball of blood and bones. The bloodless body fell to the ground practically unscathed, yet still unmoving. Gaara was wary of any tricks, and his agitated sand whirled around him protectively. There was a blur of motion, and a cloaked figure emerged from inside the motionless Akatsuki member. Standing up, the figure cast off the cloak to reveal a young man with hair as red as Gaara's wearing an Akatsuki cloak. I suppose that technique could just as easily be turned against me. And now we can stop wasting time with meaningless trickery, he said as two scrolls fell into his hands from inside his sleeves. Holding one up in each hand, Sasori's real body slowly unrolled the two scrolls to reveal the numbers 3 and 4 written in kanji. There were two clouds of smoke that quickly cleared to reveal Sasori flanked by two robed figures. One had black hair, and the other had red hair cut short like both Gaara and Sasori. Gaara couldn't contain his shock as he recognized the two puppets. One he knew through association only. He had attended many meetings under the stony gaze of the third Kazekage statue. It was surprising to see a puppet in the visage of the great leader of the hidden sand village, but the second puppet hit him much harder. While he had only been told about the exploits of the third Kazekage, he had been raised by the fourth Kazekage. Even if it was just a puppet, the resemblance was uncanny. You think you can unnerve me with these pathetic facsimiles? Your puppets have no chance against a true Kazekage. Sasori's laugh stopped Gaara from launching his sand to crush the Akatsuki's resident puppeteer in an explosion of blood. You think I've simply made copies of the previous Kazekage? They never recovered the third's body, and I think you'll find the fourth's body suspiciously missing. This the ultimate achievement of my art. Human puppets are much harder to create, but the rewards are well worth it. To make his point, the The mouths of the two Tsuchikage snapped open as a compartment on their chests opened to pulse out waves of magnetism. A wave of Gaara's sand rushed out to meet the attack of the Akatsuki's puppets. Despite the amount of sand towering over all of the combatants, it was met grain for grain by a wave of golden sand. The amount was the same, though the greater weight of the gold allowed it to overwhelm the fifth Tsuchikage's sand tsunami. Black sand, 10-foot spikes. Gaara's sand reacted instinctively to the attack from above, and while it didn't stop the massive shapes made of iron sand, his ultimate defense did slow the third Tsuchikage's attack long enough for Gaara to jump out of the way. Gaara realized then that the puppets of his two predecessors still had access to their abilities, something that Kankuro had told him was impossible. Sasori brought his hand up in a unique seal to launch his next attack, determined not to give his latest target a moment's peace. Thousand-hand manipulation force. The third Tsuchikage raised his left arm and the sides opened menacingly to reveal the seal matrices inscribed on the insides. Near-identical copies of the Tsuchikage's arm burst out of the seals, which in turn opened up to produce even more arms. Soon a wall of wooden hands was hurtling towards Gaara, who raised his sand to catch the attack. The hands wove around the sand, or attempted to anyway, as a blue-veined hand reached out and grabbed a hold of the arms. That didn't stop one of the hands from retracting into the arm to make an opening for a deadly purple mist to rain down on the Tsuchikage. His sand reacted quickly, but the poison was already around Gaara, who was holding his breath and sensing the world through his sand rather than risk opening his eyes. Not wanting to open his mouth and utter the name of the technique, Gaara simply sent his sand into a frenzied sandstorm to scour the poison from the air. Cables shot out of the mass of hands as it flew through the air, and wrapped themselves around his shield of sand. The third Tsuchikage popped off his arm at the elbow, detaching the mass of wooden hands. Sasori's hands snapped together in another unique seal that did nothing but command his puppets. Golden sand, treasure drop. Gaara looked up at the massive sphere of golden sand that began to fall on top of him. Gaara's sand formed a thick dome over him, as he was currently held in place by his own sand, which refused to move to keep the cables from tightening around him. The golden dust weighed down on the sand dome, which held up admirably under the pressure. Gaara used the room around himself, and the time his defenses bought to grind the floor beneath him to sand and escape. Still obscured from Sasori, Gaara sensed his sand cave in under the weight and velocity of the golden sphere and crush where he had been. Bursting from the ground in a flurry of sand, Gaara enveloped the two Tsuchikage puppets in coffins of sand. Crushing them did little to actually kill them, but it did freeze up all the joints of the puppets, turning them into useless hunks of wood, flesh, and metal. Sasori sighed heavily as his puppets failed to respond. "I suppose this is what I get for letting my guard down. Give up now, Sasori," said Gaara, glaring at his village's pioneering puppeteer. He had no plans of sparing the murdering puppeteer, but if he stood still, Gaara would have a much easier time killing him. "You're all out of puppets, and I've beaten your favorites. There are actually 2 puppets in my collection I adore more, though they're more sentimental than combat-oriented," said Sasori as he slowly unbuttoned his Akatsuki cloak, not turning to face the Tsuchikage who was glaring at his back. "And the Tsuchikage weren't my best works. I don't make puppets, I make art. Art is eternal, and guess what? So am I." Sasori wheeled around, and concentrated jets of water shot out of his palms. Gaara's sand was barely fast enough to get between him and the attack, and his ultimate defense began to sag under its own weight as it took on water. The water gave up after a moment, and Gaara got a good look at the monster, for there was no more mistaking Sasori as human, before him. Sasori had looked unnaturally young, and now it made sense. He stood on a thick cable that emerged from where his stomach was supposed to be as blade-like wings fanned out behind him. The lines where his joints held him together were all too apparent without the Akatsuki cloak covering him up. Small gray tubes in his palms still dripped water, and Gaara could see 2 compartments in his chest, one adorned with the kanji for scorpion painted on in red. "So you see now?" asked Sasori mockingly. "Art is eternal beauty, and my greatest masterpiece is me." Fu had spent the first part of the fight in the meeting chamber, trying not to be noticed. The moment the ceiling had exploded, she had taken to the skies in attempt to escape. She made it a fair distance from the chaos before she looked back. "Looks like my luck holds once more," she mused to herself. Looking away from the explosions and giant geometry lessons, Fu saw one thing she had no desire to see again hovering mere feet in front of her. Suspended by angelic wings of paper, Konan stared impassively as the jinchuriki backpedaled in midair. "You are needed to usher in an era of peace led by God himself. You can die in peace, knowing you brought about a greater good for all, or die in agony, knowing you failed to escape. Fu smirked victoriously. How about I escape, laughing in the knowledge I gave you the slip? Hiding in scale powder. A stream of blinding powder was propelled out of Fu's mouth, effectively blinding her opponent as the jinchuriki of the seven tails made her escape. There was a resounding explosion behind her, and the blinding dust was blasted away from where Konan had been. Fu put on a burst of speed to get further away from the battleground. She wasn't stupid though. Fu looked around frantically for the Akatsuki member, refusing to believe that she had blown herself up because Fu blinded her temporarily. Looking up, Fu barely had time to dodge the hail of paper shuriken. Every kid who had ever played ninja knew how to make paper shuriken, but Fu somehow knew that these would be far more lethal than their schoolyard counterparts. Konan swooped down at her target, more gracefully than Fu would like to admit, and made to envelop her with the paper wings. The seven tails had one thing going for it though, and that was speed and maneuverability. Fu's fast-beating wings enabled her to avoid being trapped, and Fu realized that she wouldn't be able to simply get lucky and escape this time. Wincing as she drew on more of her tail beast chakra, Fu grew a long tail that whipped out to hit Konan in the face. Any doubts about where the explosion had come from faded when the section of Konan's face Fu had struck peeled off. Noticing the sealing matrices inscribed on the notes, Fu desperately tried to get them off of her tail. It was in vain though, when the bombs went off anyway. To seal the deal, Konan sent a wave of paper shuriken into the smoke, only to hear them bounce off of some kind of armor harmlessly. The smoke cleared to reveal that Fu had become obscured by a thick blue armor, reminiscent of the beetle sealed inside her. It was one thing to draw on a tail beast chakra, but to cover your entire body in it was a burning experience comparable only to being burned alive forever. Fu had no illusions that she could keep up her armor indefinitely, but it was infinitely better than exploding. Konan glared at the jinchuriki who dared defy her. Exploding into paper slips as a long tail whipped through her, Konan transformed into hundreds of origami butterflies before reforming behind Fu. Raising her hand high, the paper around Konan ceased fluttering about and came together into a massive spear. The armor that encapsulated Fu wasn't weak, and the paper weapon glanced right off, even though Konan had hardened the paper to be stronger than steel. Still, they both knew that the armor was a temporary advantage. Once the beetle's carapace became too painful to hold up, Fu would be a sitting duck. Pushing her advantage, Fu charged Konan angrily. Konan gracefully dodged, and ducked under the tail that swiped past. She didn't see the tail reverse direction though, and was sent reeling by the blow that connected to the back of her head. Konan wheeled around to see Fu flit around, having ditched the armor for additional speed. Konan was smacked once more, and she gritted her teeth as she tried to track down any pattern to Fu's movements. Konan failed miserably as Fu smacked her around again and again. Each hit wasn't much more powerful than a punch from a genin, and it was clear that the jinchuriki was sacrificing power for speed and mobility. The blue-haired Akatsuki member burst into paper to avoid another blow, and was quick to reform away from where Fu continued to batter her paper clone. A large mass of chakra formed into a ring above her head, reminiscent of a halo, and was quickly launched at the jinchuriki. Fu noticed her mistake, and dodged out of the way. Even so, the chakram of paper left a nasty gash across the jinchuriki's chest. Demonic chakra bubbled around the wound and burned it shut, but the pain was evident on Fu's face. The pain was so intense that Fu apparently lost track of Konan's paper clone. Bumping into the clone, Fu panicked as it wrapped her in a tight grip of paper. The chakram, meanwhile, turned around in the air and hurtled towards the seized jinchuriki. While the technique could have easily cut her in half, a wound not even a jinchuriki could recover from, pain would kill Konan, childhood friend or not, if she delayed the plan for 7 years when it had just entered its final stages. So instead, the paper weapon fell apart as it got closer and helped restrain the jinchuriki. Konan made a single seal to activate the seals on the tags used to make the chakram. Archaic writing crisscrossed the paper mummy in seconds, sealing it from anything less powerful than a tailed beast ball. The paper floated to Konan, who began the long trek back to the leader of Akatsuki. She hadn't noticed at the time, but the jinchuriki had managed to place quite some distance between Akatsuki and herself. Storm-style, laser circus. Multiple beams of light flew out of Darui's hands toward their target. The lasers could travel at incredible speed, change direction as they read Darui's will, and had a near-limitless range. All in all, they were the epitome of skill. Naruto smirked as he decided to show Darui the difference between the two of them. Skill was one thing, but Akatsuki specialized in fighting tailed beasts, a task that required overwhelming power, sage art, gale force. The lasers faltered in the face of the powerful winds that tore up pieces of the floor. Even the strongest of the lasers faded to nothingness several feet from the blonde Akatsuki member. Unfortunately for Naruto, there was one other ninja present who dealt an overwhelming force. Lariat! Naruto sensed the movement of the fourth Raikage, and he would have had to have deft to miss the shouting. But the Raikage's lightning armor increased speed as well as attack and defensive strength. Naruto ducked, but was unable to fully avoid the attack, and the Raikage's metal vambraces grazed his forehead. Granted, a grazing blow was still enough to send the sage flying across the room. Naruto skidded to a stop, but looked up just in time to see the Raikage's fist hurtling towards his face. Perhaps mentioning his hand in the ceiling of Killer Bee had been a bad idea. The blow connected, but Naruto was slightly ready for it, and enacted his own counterattack in the moment when the Raikage was standing still. Grabbing onto the edge of the Raikage's vambrace with one hand, Naruto pulled himself forward, delivering his own punch to the Raikage's face. The muscle-bound Kage was sent soaring towards his bodyguard. Naruto jumped into the air, intent on trying to end it there, but Darui fulfilled his role as the Raikage's protector. Water style, tidal drive. The burst of water from Darui's mouth was strong enough to stop Naruto's forward momentum, but the stalwart sage bore the brunt of the attack easily as the Raikage rose to his feet. Calmly placing one hand into the water, the Raikage sent a massive shock through the water towards Naruto. The Akatsuki member released the grip his chakra had on the ground, allowing the water to push him away from the charged current. He hit the wall hard, but Naruto barely felt it through sage mode, instead flipping up the wall before the lightning could electrocute him. The Raikage barely missed Naruto as he punched at the Akatsuki member and smashed the wall where he had been into 1,000 little pieces. Naruto detached from the wall, using gravity at force to his attack, running through several seals as quickly as he could as the Raikage attempted to remove his hand from the wall. Naruto gathered wind chakra around his fist, hoping to use the element's advantage against lightning to break through the powerful lightning armor that empowered the Raikage. Sage Art, Whirlwind Fist. It was a testament to the defensive aspect of the lightning armor that a Sage Mode powered technique with an elemental advantage didn't punch all the way through the Raikage's chest. As it was, the wound was nothing to scoff at, and Naruto's hand was covered in blood when he was knocked away by Darui's laser circus. "Lord Raikage, are you okay?" asked Darui in concern as the Raikage returned to his bodyguard's side to regroup. "I'm fine," replied the Raikage, as he cauterized his own wound with a handful of lightning. He glared at Naruto's, who was catching his breath and trying not to rub at the bruises forming all over his body. Naruto was certain that if he could survive this last raid and Akatsuki captured the last jinchuriki, he would be in the clear. Unfortunately, survival was still up in the air. "Any last words before I offer you two to Jashin?" asked Hidan amicably. He thought he was being a pretty nice guy, letting them get in some last words before they were sacrificed to his god. Hidan didn't think he had been rude enough to justify getting punched into the wall by a rock golem. "That fucking hurt, you fat bastard. No more Mr. Nice Guy. Oh, shut up, will you?" Lava style, fiery quicklime. Kuratsuchi spat out a blob of gray quicklime that landed on top of Hidan, who began to shout as the hot substance began to burn him. "That burns, bitch. I'll fucking sacrifice you for that." He scraped the substance off of his skin with the blade of his scythe, a method that wound up removing a fair bit of his skin as well, and then swung his scythe experimentally to see if his arms still worked. Grinning maniacally, Hidan threw his scythe at the Tsuchikage's bodyguards, guiding it through the air with the cable that ran from the scythe into the sleeve of his Akatsuki cloak. A small black cylinder fell into his other hand, and a flick of his wrist extended the weapon into a long spike. Armed for close-range combat, Hidan ran towards the two hidden rock ninja who were busy dealing with his scythe's random movements. The giant rock golem that the fat one had created swung its hand down to swat Hidan, who deftly jumped over it. Stabbing the golem in the wrist several times did little to slow it down, but Hidan was able to dodge the next slap, which instead took off the rock monster's other hand. Grabbing onto the golem's head, Hidan leaned back hard. The momentum was enough to separate the golem's head from its body, but only once it stupidly added force to Hidan's attempt by punching him. Hidan shouted in glee as the pain spread throughout his body, and the force of the monster's punch took off its own head as it crumbled to dust. It would have been an acceptable loss if Hidan died like a normal person. Akatsuki caught the scythe as it swung downwards at him between two massive mitts of stone that coated his hands, but the three-sharp blade pierced through the stone and nicked his hands anyway. Hidan pulled his scythe back, taking a nice taste of the tiny amount of blood on his scythe's longest blade, while his two opponents watched on in curiosity mixed with disgust. Yeah, that's the kind of stuff Jashin wants. I suppose that little cut doesn't hurt much, but now that the ritual has begun, we can experience the ultimate pain together. Shouted Hidan as his feet used the blood dripping from his wounds to create the symbol of his religion on the ground. Too late, Kuratsuchi realized that it was a bad idea to let the zealot of Akatsuki do as he pleased. Instead of both sides catching their breath for a second while Hidan ranted, the Akatsuki member was preparing something. I don't know what you're doing, but I'm going to end this. Shouted Kuratsuchi as Hidan's skin became jet black, save for the bone-like markings across his skin. Lava style, burning uppercut. Just die already. The female spat a globule of lava onto her fist, which remained unburned thanks to some clever manipulation of her own bloodline's chakra. Now, the ritual is complete. All that's left to do is the fucking hell bitch, shouted Hidan as Kuratsuchi's flaming fist connected with his chin. The blow was a complete surprise, mostly because Hidan had his eyes closed as he prayed to his god. Glaring at the girl, who was very surprised that Hidan was still alive let alone conscious, he slashed at her with his black spike. It dealt a painful blow to her gut, and out of instinct Kuratsuchi grabbed a hold of it before Hidan punched her away. She had a rather impressive grip on the spike that was lodged in her abdomen, and pulled it away with her when Hidan punched her in the face. She looked around for Akatsuchi, wondering why he was standing around when their opponent had her injured so badly. She also wondered why Hidan was just standing in his blood circle raving like a madman. She finally found Akatsuchi, barely conscious with third-degree burns all over his chin. I'll get to you later for daring to interrupt a sacred ritual of Jashin, shouted Hidan irritably. Now where was I? Oh yeah. Die fucker. With a rather unceremonious end to his ceremony, Hidan raised his scythe up, bringing it down awkwardly to stab himself through the chest with all three blades. Akatsuchi convulsed in pain as blood practically exploded out of him. In sharp contrast to Akatsuchi's dying look of anguish, Hidan's face was one of pure bliss. That feels fucking good, he moaned out as the markings across his body faded to reveal the blood-covered skin. Kuratsuchi was scared. She had agreed to be one of her grandfather's bodyguards, assuming that no one would dare attack a meeting of the most powerful ninja in the world, and even when Akatsuki did blow down the front door, she had only thought about showing off her strength. Losing had never crossed her mind. Now losing was looking like the only outcome. Hidan grunted as he pulled the scythe out of his chest, wiping the blood off of it with his Akatsuki cloak. Now then, I'm going to make this one hurt. After all, I have all the time in the world to make you pay for interrupting my ritual. Kuratsuchi tried to back away from the approaching monster, but the spike still embedded in her chest prevented her from moving. Hidan twirled his scythe before dropping the tip into the small pool of blood that had escaped her wound. As Hidan turned to walk back to his ritual circle, his skin became black and white once more. Hidan turned back around to face his victim once he was in position, pulling out another spike to enact his ritual. Now then, bitch, a quick death is too good for someone who dare interrupt Jashin's ritual. What should I do to you? Hidan smiled sadistically as a brilliant idea came to him. It had been a while since he had been able to take his time with a sacrifice, what with his money-grubbing partner always telling him to hurry up. Let's break you mentally first. Let me hear those fucking screams. Genjutsu, Jashin's vision. Hidan's genjutsu was peculiar in that it was completely unbreakable and could not be avoided by any means. The only downside was that it could only be cast on the user, and was a mental torture like no other that would not stop until it had ran its course. The very reasons that had made it useless and forbidden in the hidden hot springs village were what made it perfect for Hidan's line of work. Jashin's ritual didn't just link the flesh, but the mind as well. Any kind of pain was a delicacy to Jashin and his servants, and mental anguish could be used without killing the sacrifice too soon. Hidan's vision turned red as he found himself suspended on a metal rack floating above a sea of fire and a rain of blood, held down by dozens of spikes impaled through his limbs. A grin found its way to his face, knowing that the little girl from the hidden rock village would be experiencing the exact same genjutsu he was. The only difference was that he enjoyed every second of it. A demon's bellow rang out through the genjutsu, seemingly coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. A massive pillar of fire erupted from the lake of flames below, and engulfed the entire apparatus holding Hidan down. The flames died down, and Hidan was ran through with a massive scythe, wielded by a shadowy figure composed entirely of pain and suffering and blood. While Hidan knew that his genjutsu world's approximation of Jashin was nowhere close to the real deal, it was close enough for the purposes of the genjutsu. The god of pain seemed to flow down his scythe, traveling into Hidan's body and filling it beyond the brim with indescribable pain. Accustomed to the pain though he was, Hidan couldn't stop convulsing as he screamed in ecstasy. In the real world, Hidan lay on the ground writhing in equal parts pain and pleasure, laughing all the while. Several yards away, Kuratsuchi writhing in pain and horror, screaming. Hidan hadn't actually used this genjutsu since being paired up with Kakuzu, who would have just complained that 10 minutes to not even kill a victim was just a waste of time. Chapter 23. Kakashi's hand sparked with a loud chirping sound as he punched his way out of the rocky prison that he had been trapped in during the explosion. The prison had been draining his chakra at an alarming rate, and he wasn't about to lose any more than he had to. Looking around the room with his Sharingan, Kakashi quickly identified his opponents as some of Orochimaru's followers. While he was glad that he wasn't fighting a member of Akatsuki 1-on-1, 4-on-1 weren't much better odds, even if they were weaker opponents. "Hey fat ass, that didn't work," taunted the only female of the group, poking a rather rotund individual with his hands on the dome of rock that had trapped Kakashi. "Taiyuya, a girl shouldn't talk that way." Taiyuya smacked the orange-haired man on his head with a thin piece of metal, which upon further inspection was a flute. "Bite me, fatso," said Taiyuya, drawing out the last word mockingly. The larger man grit his teeth, but otherwise remained silent. "Let's get down to business and end this quickly. Otherwise Kimimaro and Lord Orochimaru will never let us live this down," said the apparent leader of the group, a blue-haired man with what appeared to be a second, limp head coming out of the back of his neck. "Let's finish this piece of trash by the book." He jumped back, along with the red-headed female and the six-armed member of the squad. Biting down on his thumb, he ran through the seals for a summoning. Kakashi's Sharingan widened as he ran forward to try and stop the leader of the group from summoning an ally. The fatter member of the four-man squad slammed his hands on the ground in an attempt to stop Kakashi from interfering. Earth style, Earth shore return. A large rectangle of rock rose up between Kakashi and his targets, and he performed his own seals on the run to break through the defensive barrier of stone. Lightning blade. The blue lightning in his hand tore through the lower-leveled Earth style like it wasn't even there, and Kakashi continued onwards to attack the three that had jumped away from the front lines. He stopped midair as the large man below reached up with surprising speed and grabbed hold of his ankle, swinging him around with a loud shout like a ragdoll. "This way!" shouted out the leader, and his comrade was eager to comply, throwing Kakashi towards the other three before the leaf ninja could free himself with his lightning blade. Summoning Rashomon. Slamming his hands on the ground to complete the technique, he summoned a large red gate that rose out of the ground behind him, raising the other two members of his squad high into the air of the cavernous room they were fighting in. Kakashi's hand thrust the lightning forward towards the leader of the group, intent on taking him out immediately. The smart thing to do would have been to retreat to the top of the wall, but Orochimaru's underling actually ran towards the hidden leaf jonin, rearing back his own fist for a punch. Their fists passed, each traveling towards the other's face at great speeds, until Kakashi's stopped dead in its tracks. His Sharingan had seen the counter, of course, but it had been so unexpected, he simply hadn't reacted in time to avoid it. In his defense, it was perfectly reasonable that Kakashi would be surprised by another hand emerging from halfway up the man's arm to grab his wrist. The Sound 4's leader brought back his other fist, and it connected cleanly with Kakashi's face, twice from the feel of it. Kakashi was sent flying backwards, and he skidded to a stop just in time for the world to fade to black as a sound reached his ears. Suddenly, chains bound him, arresting his movements. Scoffing at the obvious genjutsu that had been easy to detect even without the Sharingan allowing him to see it traveling through the sound waves, Kakashi broke it with hardly a second thought. He ducked underneath a golden boomerang, and then jumped to the side as several more dug into the ground where he had just been standing. "Jesus Kidamaru, you really are useless," berated Taiyuya, addressing the six-armed Spider-Man who was in the process of spitting out more golden web to shape into weapons. "Well, screw you too," he retorted short-temperedly. "At least he noticed my attack." "Did you even cast a genjutsu there?" Taiyuya was about to respond when the leader of the group spoke up. "This is Kakashi of the Sharingan. Of course he didn't bother with a low-level genjutsu like that. Bring out your doki to help me and Jirobo deal with him. Kidamaru, you take any openings you find to turn him into a pincushion." "Okay, Sakan. No need to tell me twice. Shame the game is gonna end so soon though," Kidamaru lamented. Kakashi was almost dumbstruck by their appalling lack of teamwork. That soon changed to appreciation of their teamwork in the face of such hatred and animosity towards each other when they went on the offensive. The four covered each other almost perfectly, Sakan's lightning-quick style that utilized his unique ability to grow more limbs whenever and wherever he felt like was complemented by the slow and powerful style Jirobo utilized. Any openings for Kakashi to go on the attack were immediately closed by golden projectiles courtesy of Kidameru. Wary of any more genjutsu when he heard the sound of the flute start up again, Kakashi was just downright surprised again by the 3 large ogres that came at him swinging wildly with clubs, claws, and one using its body as a large battering ram. That answered his question about what the doki were, and would have overwhelmed any lesser ninja with sheer ferocity and numbers. Kakashi was an elite of the Hidden Leaf Village though, and what the ogres had in raw power, they lacked in skill. In addition, their wild attacks had forced Jirobo and Sakan to back off a bit, lest they be struck down by the massive creatures in the crossfire. Given what he had observed, Kakashi didn't think anyone would really care about their comrades' well-being. Dodging the haphazard attacks was made even easier by the Sharingan, and he formulated an insane plan to regain momentum in this fight. Jumping on top of the monster's club as it crashed down on the ground next to him, Kakashi jumped up onto the large metal weapon. Reacting as anyone who didn't spend a lot of time studying taijutsu would be expected to, the ogre flung its weapon upwards in an attempt to fling Kakashi off. On one hand, this should have never worked, as Kakashi could have easily fixed himself to the club with chakra. On the other hand, Kakashi didn't want to waste his time fighting mindless summons when he could use such a base reaction to take the fight to the one who was controlling the monsters. The Sound 4 had no idea what to think as Kakashi went flying through the air as if he had been launched by a catapult, which he kind of had been. Blue lightning raced down his arm as he flew towards the top of the giant red gate, and more specifically the person engrossed in playing her flute. Kidameru threw the golden kunai he had crafted, but they were swatted away with ease by the epitome of lightning-style techniques. The piercing chirp of the lightning blade was enough to cut through the sound of her flute, and Taiyuya looked up just in time to panic. To Taiyuya's credit, she managed to raise her flute up as some kind of last resort defense. It was made of a sturdy metal, capable of deflecting kunai and shuriken with ease, but the musical weapon stood no chance at all against the technique that got its name by cutting a bolt of actual lightning down the middle. The flute, coupled with a far too late attempt at dodging, did redirect the attack though. Kakashi's aim had been a little hit or miss to begin with, what with his insane tactic to get close enough to use his best technique, and he had no way at all to alter his course while in the air. So instead of running his arm cleanly through the redhead's chest, Kakashi settled for slicing her right arm from her body in an explosion of blood. Crying out in pain, Taiyuya fell backwards off of the massive Rashomon gate clutching her shoulder, which was bleeding heavily from the new opening created by the lightning blade. The next step of Kakashi's plan was to deal with the spider lurking up here as well, but before he could turn around, 3 fists impacted Kakashi's back, one hitting the spot where Zetsu had stabbed him. The fake Yamato's attack had been healed by Tsunade, but both of them had known it was a rush job. Cringing in pain, Kakashi blindly whipped his lightning blade around, forcing Kidameru to vacate the top of the Rashomon gate. "Well, there goes the black mage," said Kidameru, not sounding remorseful about his comrade's defeat as he should have. "Looks like this boss is tough. Anyone got any phoenix feathers?" "Shut up," said Sakan tersely. "It appears we need to step up our game. I really didn't want to use the curse seal against trash like this, but it looks like we have no choice." Kakashi was not pleased by the idea of cursed seals. Anything sealed was usually handy in a fight, and cursed things were usually powerful, even if the drawbacks weren't good. Dark marks began to spread across the skin of the remaining 3 members of the Sound 4, and unbeknownst to them all, Taiyuya's mark subconsciously activated to keep her alive through the shock of losing an arm. The actual marks varied from spots akin to droplets of water to vine-like markings and lines of arrows. Kakashi's Sharingan wasn't as skilled as the Byakugan at seeing chakra, but he could easily sense the dark and oppressive chakra pulsating through the marks. "Man, these cheat codes feel amazing as always," said Kidameru, flexing his muscles appreciatively. Kakashi was more than happy to let them revel in their own strength while he nursed his reopened wound. It was nowhere near as life-threatening as it had been when Zetsu had first stabbed him, but if he had to fight while injured to that extent, it might as well be. "It will be a pain to take a break instead of helping Lord Orochimaru once we finish wiping the floor with this piece of trash. And he won't be happy to know that we lost Taiyuya," said Jirobo, actually shocking Kakashi with how much he cared. Granted, Kakashi had been expecting all 3 of them to bury each other alive and dance on the graves if given the opportunity, so his expectations for teamwork were at a record low. The black curse seals spread the rest of the way across the remaining 3's skin, turning it into an ashen gray. Their appearances altered drastically as well, until each resembled a unique demon. Sakan looked like a demon right out of a children's fairy tale, complete with blood-red skin and a single horn jutting out of his head. Jirobo looked even more ogre-like than before, with bumpy red skin and a wild mane of orange hair instead of the tiny amount on an otherwise bald head he had before transforming. Kidamaru's black hair had become a light gray, and his skin had turned red as well. There were 2 horns on either side of his head, much smaller than Sakan's larger one, and a third eye located between them on his forehead. Sakan reached up with a red hand and tapped the mop of hair emerging from the back of his neck. "Time to wake up, bro," he said, wearing a grin that wouldn't look out of place on a serial killer. "We've got to take out the trash." To Kakashi's apparently never-ending surprise, the mass of hair straightened up and spun around to reveal a face identical to Sakan's. Looking around for a moment, the second head sighed heavily, before stepping out of Sakan's body with another identical one. "I suppose it won't do to have the Sound 4 win with only 3 members. Just wouldn't make sense." The side that he had exited on changed on Sakan, becoming spiky gray armor akin to a dragon's hide. "Thanks, Yukon," said Jirobo, always proving himself the most polite of the group. Despite the ogre's appearance, he seemed calmer than before if anything else. "Fuck off, I was enjoying my nap, thank you very much," replied Yukon irritably. Jirobo grit his teeth angrily, clenching his fists in an attempt to restrain his anger. Roaring in fury, the largest member of the Sound 4 charged at Kakashi recklessly. "I'm going to crush you before I crush everything else here. You're dead." Kakashi took back what he said about being the calmest member of the quartet. Arhut fist, Jirobo charged recklessly, swinging wildly. Kakashi easily sidestepped the telegraphed blows, but the sheer force threatened to pull him around with the wind generated by each swing. Drawing a kunai, Kakashi went to incapacitate the red giant, but he was forced to jump back when a golden arrow half as big as he was threatened to take off his arm. Looking up, he saw Kidamaru suspended in a web, holding a giant golden bow, strung with spider silk. "Damn, I missed. Guess I need to raise my accuracy skill some more," he murmured to himself as he prepared another arrow. Kakashi's Sharingan followed the arrow as it tore through the air, and allowed him to read the otherwise imperceptible change in course as it almost read his effort to avoid it. Luckily, Kakashi noticed the arrow's adjustment with his Sharingan, and stopped as the arrow smashed into the ground he had almost been standing on. Kakashi ducked under twin blows from the 2 identical demons that came at him from either side. The brothers grabbed a hold of each other's hand, using it to pull themselves in for a dual kick that would have likely pounded Kakashi into unconsciousness if it had connected. Falling backwards had saved him, and in a feat of dexterity, Kakashi straightened up and drove his kunai through the 2 hands. Kakashi jumped back to dodge Jirobo's enraged punch. The raging berserker either didn't see or didn't care about the 2 comrades stuck to each other in his way. A powerful punch caught on their forcibly joined hands and pulled the leaders of the Sound 4 to the ground in an explosion of dust. Kakashi flew through hand seals as he flew backwards, preparing his chakra to take out Orochimaru's underlings. Fire style, fireball technique. The flames shot out of his mouth, ignoring the mask in the way, and engulfed the 3 members of the Sound 4. Kakashi was still in midair though, and had no way of avoiding the golden arrow that came tearing through the fireball, intent on running him through. Luckily, the fireball burned up the guide thread attached to the back of the arrow, and Kidamaru couldn't aim properly in the first place with his vision obscured by raging flames. The arrow still tore through Kakashi's right shoulder, effectively rendering the limb useless. Still, with the others out of the way, Kakashi was confident he could take the archer out one-on-one, even wounded as grievously as he was. Unfortunately, Kakashi had underestimated the resilience granted by the Cursed Seal's second stage. Jirobo decided to correct his misconception by coming at him in a fit of rage, barely aware of the world around him, intent only on ending Kakashi's life. Kakashi skidded to a stop and ran towards the red ogre, good hand holding a chirping ball of lightning. Time seemed to slow as the 2 were about to clash, Jirobo with his fist held high, and Kakashi coming in low with a lightning blade clutched in his left hand. The speed that Kakashi had honed throughout his career as an elite ninja of the Hidden Leaf was too great for the slow but powerful Jirobo to handle though, and he stopped dead in his tracks as Kakashi's hand erupted out of his back in a spray of blood. Kakashi looked over the dying man's shoulder as his curse mark faded to see Kidamaru launch another arrow at him. Waiting until the last second, Kakashi used Jirobo's body to manipulate the trajectory of the projectile while it was still inside the fat corpse, and the golden arrow barely grazed him, leaving a small cut on his side. Casting the dead man down, Kakashi evaluated his remaining 3 opponents. Kidamaru was busy chewing the webbing for his next arrow, mumbling to himself about ballistic trajectory and the effects of any drafts in the area. Sakan and Yukon had rejoined in order to increase the rate at which they healed from the burns across their bodies. but Kakashi didn't know why they had rejoined, he just observed that they had. Facing down Sakan and his brother would be difficult enough without having to deal with the spider archer taking potshots at him during the fight, and dealing with the twins' extra limbs would be difficult without the use of his right hand anyway. Realizing he had little choice if he wanted to get out of here alive, Kakashi began to focus a large amount of chakra into his Sharingan. The red and black eye spun wildly as it morphed into a three-bladed pinwheel. Kidamura was the target of Kakashi's reality-warping cameo, and the archer's webs worked against him for once. While he didn't stick to his own webs, he had voluntarily wrapped his arms up to reduce the recoil of firing his massive weapon and brace himself. Now, by the time he noticed what Kakashi was doing, he didn't have time to unravel himself before the hole in reality opened, sucking him into another dimension with a painful-sounding scream. Blood began to seep out of Kakashi's Mangekyo Sharingan, and over his mask as he fell to one knee in chakra exhaustion. A foot connected painfully with his face as his Sharingan returned to normal. "You worthless piece of trash!" shouted Sakan in a furious rage as he kicked the exhausted Kakashi around. The Hokage's bodyguard was too tired to even think about moving, and Sakan exploited it, reveling in his opponent's weakness. "Now I'm the only one on his team left. I'm the leader of absolutely nothing." Kakashi somehow found the strength for a bit of sarcasm in him. "Not that you were really leading them anyway. I've seen better teamwork from a group of freshly minted genin from different villages." Sakan's face contorted in anger as he delivered another kick to Kakashi's stomach. Stepping maliciously on Kakashi's wounded shoulder to elicit a gasp of pain, Sakan pulled out a kunai for the finishing blow. "Any last words?" he asked wrathfully. Kakashi grinned, though the expression was hidden by his mask. "Yeah. I win," he said simply. Sakan had time to look confused before Kakashi's shadow clone burst out of the ground beneath them. Grabbing a hold of Yukon's head with both hands, it converted its entire being into lightning chakra. The two demon twins screamed in agony as the lightning fried Yukon and shocked his joined brother into unconsciousness. The clone disappeared in a cloud of smoke, and Sakan and Yukon collapsed on the ground next to Kakashi. The elite ninja of the Hidden Leaf Village looked down at his mangled shoulder, and could feel the reopened wound Zetsu had given him in his back. He had lost a lot of blood and chakra in the fight, and he wasn't going to be much good to anyone except perhaps as a hostage anytime soon. Still, he had managed to defeat Orochimaru's elite bodyguards by his lonesome, and he thought that deserved some credit. "As the host of this event, I will be your opponent. It is only fair that the two leaders should clash," said Mifune as he stared down Pain. The orange-haired god simply looked at the old samurai as one would a misguided child. "I suppose no harm could come of letting you entertain me until Konan captures the Seven Tails," the pierced man said condescendingly. Mifune decided to cut their banter short by unsheathing his katana rapidly. The quick application of chakra sent a blade of chakra hurtling towards Pain that didn't cover half the distance between them before Mifune had sheathed his blade. Pain's rippled eyes narrowed dangerously, and the chakra wave dispersed harmlessly against an invisible barrier. A jet-black rod emerged from the sleeve of Pain's Akatsuki cloak to block the blow that came immediately afterwards. The samurai leader struggled to break through the simple rod, but was blasted away after a few seconds. Looking at Pain, the leader of Akatsuki didn't seem to have exerted himself at all. "It appears that you won't be as entertaining as I had hoped. I'll end this quickly," said Pain as he raised his hand. Mifune tightened his grip on the hilt of his sheathed sword, ready for any kind of attack. He suddenly felt a powerful force pull him across the conference room towards Pain's outstretched hand. Pain raised the black rod in his other hand to impale Mifune, and the rod extended to a length much longer than the sleeve it had emerged from. Mifune drew his sword, catching the tip of the rod with the edge of his sword. The blow deflected the rod's attempt to run him through, and Mifune came extremely close to crashing into Pain as a result of the powerful pull. As it was, the deflection caused Mifune to pass Pain on the right, missing a collision by several inches. He twisted the katana in his hands expertly, almost cutting off Pain's arm. A twist of Pain's wrist caused the long black rod to snap easily, and Akatsuki's leader spun it around to block Mifune's strike. The samurai jumped back as he sensed the impending attack. There were no obvious cues that Pain was about to blast him with the force of a small mountain, but the old samurai's honed battle sense could detect something. Either way, the distance was not nearly enough, as Pain's attack sent him skidding across the room regardless. "Perhaps you can provide me some small measure of entertainment, after all," said Pain, looking at Mifune appreciatively. "Though you will be no match for a god such as myself." Mifune sheathed his sword, preparing his most devastating attack. "I'll end this with my best attack." Final draw. Mifune channeled a large amount of chakra into the scabbard of his katana, releasing it all with a quick draw and slice of his katana, sheathing the weapon before the blast of cutting chakra had gone even 1 foot. The blast of chakra was faster than sound, bigger than a small building, and composed of thousands of blades that could slice opponents up even better than the sword that had launched them. Pain smirked in victory, and closed his eyes as the blades of chakra bore down on him. Is that all you have? I'm disappointed. Pain opened his eyes as the attack was only inches from his face. Shinra Tensei. The blast of force from his Rinnegan blew the samurai's attack away with no effort at all. Pain began to gloat, but stopped when he felt a sharp pain in his chest. Looking down, his Rinnegan widened to see Mifune, katana embedded in his chest. The final draw was not my best attack, it was your own overconfidence. Even a genin's kunai is as lethal as your most powerful attack. Mifune ripped out his katana and swung again, this time removing Pain's head from his body with a stroke so fast the blood flew off his katana, resulting in a perfectly clean blade when he sheathed it once more. Your overconfidence was your undoing, said Mifune as he turned away. The old samurai stopped dead in his tracks when a large metal blade shot up out of the floor and threatened to impale him. Even given his attempt to dodge, his left arm was severed from his body. Looking to the attacker as he rose out of the floor, Mifune was struck by how much of a resemblance this newcomer had to Akatsuki's deceased leader. If the bald man before him had orange hair, he could easily see them as twins, and your overconfidence will be yours, said a voice behind him. Mifune whirled around to see a tall orange-haired man with many facial piercings and a long ponytail. As you will soon discover, pain has many forms. Mifune spun around once more, tightening his grip on his katana with his remaining hand in case any of the unknown Akatsuki members decided to attack. The new one was sturdily built, with a short and spiky orange haircut and the same kinds of piercings, as does Pain. Mifune glanced to his right to see yet another new Akatsuki member that was almost identical to the beheaded man at his feet. This one had long and straight hair in addition to more facial piercings and his Akatsuki cloak. How many can you experience before you experience no more? Asked another version of Akatsuki's leader. Mifune had begun to piece together that the Pain he had defeated was nothing more than some kind of advanced clone, and that the real Pain was hidden among his copies. The last Pain was unique in that it was the only female of the group, with long orange hair done up in some kind of bun. Mifune became instantly wary as the ceiling exploded inwards, forcing him to slice some blocks of stone that would have otherwise crushed him. He was disheartened and glad at the same time that the newcomer was not another Path of Pain, but the blue-haired woman from earlier. She looked at the only Pain to have been defeated with a sorrowful look, but turned quickly to face the ponytailed Pain. It is time for the final phase, she said as a bale of paper vaguely shaped like a human descended gently out of the sky. Mifune realized that letting Akatsuki reach the final stage of their plan wouldn't be good for anyone, and took a step forward, only for the bald Pain to grab him in a powerful bear hug with 6 arms. The long-haired Pain smirked when he noticed this, and slammed his hand on the ground as if to summon something. What emerged from the cloud of smoke was surprising to say the least. Most summons were large, terrifying beasts used to strike fear into the hearts of any unfortunate to cross their path. They were not starving men with pure white hair and strange walking contraptions, with dozens of black rods sticking out of their backs. The Pains around him all collapsed as the crippled man pulled his arms out of the tubes by his sides and brought them together into a simple hand seal. The ground rumbled as a large and utterly terrifying statue rose out of the ground behind him. The paper rose away from the covered figure's head, revealing the girl that the Raikage had claimed to be the last jinchuriki. She appeared to be unconscious, as she didn't react at all when the white-haired man placed a hand upon her head. The statue's mouth opened wide and the bit fell to the ground with a resounding thud as the man in the walk pulled upwards with a great flourish as if throwing something into the air. Mifune didn't hear so much as feel the ripping sensation that accompanied the motion. The human shape made entirely of blue chakra flew into the air, pulling along an almost solid ball of black chakra condensed into the middle. Another hand seal was made by the mysterious man, and a chain made entirely of chakra shot out of the statue's mouth to impale the ball of black chakra before dragging it into the mouth, which closed sharply. The last eye that had remained closed opened instantly, and blood began to seep from the 9 eyes as the statue moved of its own accord to scream loudly, though the noise was likely lost in the cacophony of the many battles. The statue began to deform, stretching unnaturally, and Mifune was horrified despite the many battles and wars he had seen. Noting compared to this, the white-haired man raised a hand feebly to point at the mutating statue, and a long black rod identical to the ones Pain had used, and the ones embedded in his back extended out and pierced the creature. The white-haired man spoke with a commanding voice contrary to his frail appearance. Sealing technique, creation of the sage. Red chakra began to travel down the rod and entered the man's body, and his hair started to adopt a pink tint, before brightening into a vibrant shade of red. The technique didn't stop there though, and the statue began to be absorbed in its entirety. As the statue warped and disappeared, the rods emerging from the man's back fell out, and the hole left behind healed themselves. The last of the statue was absorbed, and an explosion of chakra came forth from the man. When the chakra subsided, the contraption the man had been standing in had been destroyed, and Mifune saw that the man's legs were destroyed and crippled. Bringing his hands into another seal, a large demon head rose from the ground, wreathed in ethereal flames. The man hobbled into the King of Hell's open mouth, which closed behind him as the creature began chewing. When it faded, the man's legs were in perfect condition, and he walked over to the blue-haired woman with ease. She handed him an Akatsuki cloak while averting her eyes, and he donned it quickly, though he did not bother to button it up. Turning to Mifune, he let the leader of the samurai, who was no longer restrained, but held in place by awe and fear, get a good look at his eyes. They were similar to the simple ripples of the Rinnegan, but now there were 9 tomo in them, 3 per ring, though the 9th in each eye looked a bit more transparent than the other 8. It was nice of Itachi to tell me of Madara and his plans, said the man as he began to walk calmly. From the new angle, Mifune could see the black orbs of chakra that floated around his back. My original plan was an act of desperation, as I would not live very long after it was put into action. But with the information I gleaned from Madara's plan, I was able to make my own much more plausible. Before was just posturing. Now I am a god and true, who will rule over an era of peace with an iron fist for all eternity. I am no longer pain. Now I am Nagato once more. It is a shame that you will not live to see it. Nagato grew 4 more arms, exactly like the bald path of pain had before. Mifune struck out with his katana, but was blasted away once more by the same force that the pain he had killed used. The 6 arms began to form hand seals as Mifune shot a blade of chakra at Nagato. It too proved useless as it was absorbed into some kind of invisible barrier that surrounded him. The 3 sets of hands all finished their seals at the exact same time, and Nagato turned to face Mifune, who stood aghast at the abilities his opponent had displayed. The black orbs of chakra began to form a large sphere around Nagato as if to protect him from something. A blow from the heavens themselves, called forth by God, shall usher in an era of peace, he said calmly, before the sphere of black chakra cut him off from Mifune entirely. Konan finally moved from where she had been standing next to Fu's dead body, exploding into a flurry of paper that exited the area as quickly as possible. Sasuke's Susanoo swung its blade of black flames, turning the water it touched directly into steam, as the last Uchiha tried to hit Kisame. Unfortunately, Kisame was far too agile underwater, and simply ran into the ethereal warrior again, siphoning off some more chakra simply by coming into contact with the being, an ability he had gained since fusing with his sword. It was only due to the insane amount of chakra that Susanoo consisted of that it was still protecting Sasuke. It even kept the water away, putting Sasuke in a small pocket of air. You're nothing compared to Itachi, taunted Kisame once more. His flames were hotter than the sun, his genjutsu could trap anyone in a world only he controlled for days on end. And he would have wiped the floor with me before we even began. I can't believe you managed to beat him. That was when it dawned on Sasuke. Up until now, he had been fighting Kisame like Itachi, all Amaterasu and Tsukiyomi, flashing his Mangekyo Sharingan at every opportunity. The sheer power of the techniques had carried him this far, but Kisame was right. Itachi had been using his eyes for years. There was no way Sasuke could outdo a man who had lived with Itachi for years and seen all the techniques Sasuke was now using, but better. So Sasuke decided to stop fighting as Itachi, and start fighting like Sasuke Uchiha. Lightning style, Grand Chidori Stream. The lighting chakra arced out from Sasuke in all directions, so potent that it forced Kisame to stop for a second and absorb the paralyzing chakra. Smirking in victory, Sasuke exploited that second for all it was worth, smacking the half-shark away with the Amaterasu blade in his warrior's right hand. It did little to actually burn Kisame, as he simply absorbed the fire through his skin, but there was so much raw chakra in the flames that it took a good second. A second that Sasuke used to swim out of the dome of water that Kisame had conjured. It helped that Kisame himself had been sent hurtling away, and the dome of water followed him, moving the edge closer to Sasuke. Gasping in the cold, sharp air, Sasuke fell to the ground, protected by his Susanoo, which faded once it had absorbed the force of impact. Sasuke looked up to see Kisame and his sword separate in the water. The figure was still tiny, and he owed the clarity of his sight to his Sharingan. Kisame ran through hand seals that even the Sharingan couldn't make out at such a distance, and the watery dome began to come towards Kisame, rising up into the sky above him. Kisame was carried up hundreds of feet into the air by the water as it took on the shape of a massive shark and turned around to fall on Sasuke and everything within half a mile of him. Sasuke could hear Kisame shout the technique's name across the distance as the colossal water shark bore down on him. Super Water Shark Bomb. Sasuke looked up at the technique, channeling chakra through his Mangekyo Sharingan. Amaterasu. The black fire traveled instantaneously to hit whatever Sasuke was looking at, and at the moment he was having trouble seeing anything but the giant shark bomb. Sasuke wasn't overly worried though. Amaterasu was so powerful it could burn other flames, and water was just one more thing to burn away. Sasuke began to worry when the shark continued to come at him. The Uchiha had no way of knowing that the technique was absorbing chakra from the black fire and converting it back into water almost as quickly as Amaterasu evaporated them. Sasuke shouted out in defiance and poured more chakra into the technique as Kisame roared as well, and his giant water shark seemed to swell for a moment. Then Sasuke's Mangekyo Sharingan began to spin violently. In his time training in the hidden cloud village, Sasuke had learned to control the shape of Amaterasu with his other eye in order to create the sword that his Susanoo wielded, since Itachi's Tatsuka blade had died with him. The Sharingan warped the fire not into a blade this time, but simply wrapped it around the giant shark. Kisame noticed and quickly ejected himself out of the tail of his super water shark bomb. The technique was designed to absorb any technique that it ate, but just as a shark can't draw sustenance from something touching its sides, the super water shark bomb couldn't absorb chakra from any technique not in its mouth. Amaterasu had no such restrictions, burning the water away just as easily from any side. Kisame's technique was now evaporating faster than it could absorb chakra, and quickly faded into nothing but steam. The shark man landed several yards away from Sasuke, catching Samehada out of the air without even looking. "Nicely done, chum," said Kisame mockingly. "Those were two of my best techniques, but I suppose an Uchiha won't be outdone in raw power. I'll just have to beat you into the ground the old-fashioned way. Won't be easy though. Samehada isn't really made for clean kills. But what's a few gallons of blood between friends?" Sasuke didn't answer, instead adopting a defensive stance as he prepared for Kisame's attack. There was little chance of him going on the attack with his leg as wounded as it was, and he could only hope Kisame would get cocky and make a mistake. He would be hard-pressed to win this fight though, no matter what happened. He was a bit confused though, when he noticed Kisame staring over his shoulder in awe. Turning to see what had caught the Akatsuki member's attention, he saw something that made him drop his sword in sheer shock. Eclipsing the sun was a massive meteor several times the size of the massive attacks the two had just been clashing with, bursting through the clouds. Chapter 24. Naruto and the Raikage had smashed their way through the meeting building, trading blows and gaining bruises along the way until they came to the roof of the building. Deidara's explosions lit up the sky as Naruto faced down the leader of the village hidden in the clouds. "Your lightning armor is impressive, but now that we're outside, I can show you why you never stood a chance." Summoning technique, Naruto slammed his hand on the ground, and Gamabunta emerged from the cloud of smoke. Naruto was about to tell Gamabunta to soak the area in oil, when he froze up at a bellowing laughter. "You know, Bunta, old pal? You're the best drinking buddy a guy could ask for." Naruto slowly turned to look up at the leader of the Toads, who was clearly drunk, and the white-haired man atop his head who was equally as hammered. "Right back at ya, Jiraiya," said Gamabunta loudly. The Raikage held off on attacking the flustered Akatsuki member, who had no idea at all of how to deal with this. "Hold up, gotta deal with this summoner. Wait a minute. I didn't summon ya," said Jiraiya as if it were just now occurring to him. The drunk Sannin looked into the sky at the explosions and giant shapes and then tried to lean out over the giant toad's head. He failed spectacularly, falling down several stories and landing on his head. He stood up shakily and looked around until he saw Naruto. "Aha! Looking for a rematch with the fabled Jiraiya, eh? I'm more than happy to oblige." Summoning technique. Biting his thumb, Jiraiya attempted to summon Fukasaku and Shima, and while the resulting summon was about the right size, the goggle-wearing messenger toad wasn't quite the backup that the two elder sages of Mount Myoboku were. The small toad that Jiraiya had summoned though was very perceptive as to how bad it would be for Jiraiya to be stumbling around the battlefield drunk out of his mind. "Let's get you back home before you end up dead," said the little messenger toad as he hopped up onto Jiraiya's head. Naruto didn't protest, as he had no wish to fight Jiraiya in addition to the Raikage, even if he was sure to win. The Raikage was all too content to not have to watch out for an intoxicated Sannin while fighting one of the most even matches he had ever been in since his father had passed away. In a cloud of smoke, Jiraiya returned to Mount Myoboku. "Oh, I was drinking with him!" yelled Gamabunta loudly. Naruto placed his hand on his face in exasperation, looking around to make sure that the Raikage wasn't taking advantage of the situation. "I just need some oil, then you can go home and drink up a storm," said Naruto a tad impatiently. "I'll even foot the bill for your next bender." Gamabunta went from glaring at Naruto to laughing up a storm almost immediately. "I always liked you, you know that? I'll give you your oil. Toad style, oil bullet." Hick! Gamabunta slammed his hands together and spat out a massive quantity of toad oil. Swaying as he tried to balance on only 2 feet, Gamabunta dismissed himself in a cloud of smoke. Naruto enacted the second stage of his plan as the Raikage made ready to rush him. Running through his hand seals, Naruto took a deep breath. Sage Art, Vaporizing Wind. The resulting blast of wind was fairly random, striking with weak blows everywhere and anywhere. The results were less than spectacular, as the winds died out long before they reached the Raikage, but Naruto had accomplished what he had wanted to do. The Raikage rushed forth, and the lightning chakra coating his body ignited the vaporous toad oil in the air, causing a massive explosion. It was a bit of an unorthodox application, but Naruto had spent years traveling with Deidara, and that was not something that could be done without learning at least 100 new ways to make things into art. The end result was the Raikage being thrown past Naruto, carried by his own momentum and the force of the explosion. As the leader of the hidden cloud village went soaring past, Naruto delivered a powerful downwards chop that sent the Raikage through the ground and into the rooms below. The Akatsuki member jumped back as the lightning-clad man came bursting back up with a loud shout and an explosion of lightning. Rushing forward at insane speeds, he grabbed Naruto and bodily hefted the sage up over his head. Liger Bomb. It wasn't really a jutsu so much as it was simply slamming Naruto into the ground headfirst with a great deal of force. A sharp kick to the chin sent the Raikage straight up into the air, and while Naruto couldn't quite reach, Sage Mode was more than willing to extend the range of his blow. The Raikage landed deftly, looking at Naruto angrily before the entire building shook. Looking up in confusion as they suddenly found themselves in the shade, both Naruto and the Raikage were shocked at the size of the massive ball of stone hurtling towards them. Naruto looked around to see Deidara hovering in the air, barely able to move as well. Naruto shouted to her as he threw a scroll at her as hard as he could. "Deidara! Run!" To her credit, she caught the scroll and only looked at it in confusion for a second or two before remembering what it did. Naruto, meanwhile, summoned a toad he knew wouldn't be joining in Gamabunta's binge drinking. "Hey bro, what do you need?" asked a completely sober Gamakichi. The toad boss' son had grown almost as large as his father over the years, and didn't talk so much as bellow. "Holy shit, what is that?" screamed the toad as he looked up to see the gigantic rock hurtling down on them. "That's why I need a lift out of here, and quick!" shouted Naruto. Gamakichi knew the routine, and quickly hit Naruto in the chest with his tongue. The adhesive usually used for catching bugs grabbed hold of Naruto as he was pulled into the toad's mouth before Gamakichi disappeared in a cloud of smoke. The Raikage looked down as his opponent disappeared and roared in anger before turning his attention to the meteor above him, ready to punch it into gravel if need be. Kakuzu was not a happy camper. He had entered this fight expecting to quickly kill a medic that was the last descendant of his most hated enemy, and instead he had lost 3 of his hearts before playing defense while the 5th Hokage healed every blow he landed as if he were throwing tissue paper at her. All in all, he was beginning to think that she might just defeat him as her grandfather had. But then that irrational fear passed when his overwhelming experience crushed it underfoot. He had entered this fight emotional, for him anyway, and paid the price. Now that he was in full control of his faculties though, he knew that he would win. The only question was how long he would have to wait in order to do so. The technique that Tsunade was using to passively heal herself used chakra, and like any technique that used chakra, it would eventually run out. However, Kakuzu was beginning to wonder just how much chakra the woman had stored up. With only his water and lightning hearts left, Kakuzu wasn't sure if he could fend off the furious woman who seemed to only pause for a second when stabbed in the heart by a bolt of lightning forever. He jumped back as Tsunade punched the ground where he had been standing a moment before, shattering it in a way reminiscent of a boulder crushing glass. One particularly large chunk of earth was sent flying at him, and it broke into pieces when it hit Kakuzu, who merely grunted from the impact. He might not be a natural with Earth-style techniques anymore, but the Earth Spear was still a favorite of his, and he had trained in its use meticulously. His skin transitioned from the darker tone that signified its Earth-style enhanced toughness back to the lighter shade that didn't waste chakra. Kakuzu looked up, ready to dodge another blow capable of turning bones to dust, only to see Tsunade breathing heavily. The Hokage staggered to her left a bit as the tattoos running along her body faded, taking her unnatural youth along with them. Facing Kakuzu now was an old hag who could barely stay upright. "Your medical expertise appears to have run dry, Senju," said Kakuzu, trying hard not to breathe in relief. "I'll tell you this before I kill you, you certainly are a descendant of that man." Kakuzu clapped his hands together in a series of hand seals as he prepared to finish the line of his most hated enemy. Lightning style, false darkness. Kakuzu's last mask rose up over his shoulder and opened its mouth with a sharp crack as electricity sparked in its maw. Just as the beam of death shot out of his mask's mouth, the entire building rumbled. Unprepared, Kakuzu staggered a bit to avoid falling over, an action that threw off his aim by quite a bit. He missed the aging Hokage by a mile, and his beam of lightning tore through the walls and ceiling. Kakuzu had picked up many skills over his incredibly long career, and while he was no master at them, he could use some level of practically every ninja art in existence. Extending his sensory reach to try and sense what had caused the entire building to shake like that, Kakuzu became convinced that he had forgotten something very important about sensing chakra, because there was no way he was detecting a power that great coming from a single human. Still though, Kakuzu continued to try and look around, opting to ignore the wheezing hag on the floor nearby in favor of attempting to identify the threat as friend or foe. Extending his limited sensory range a bit further, and Kakuzu sensed something that had him running through hand seals as quickly as he could. He couldn't see what object was being dropped on the building, but anything with such a massive amount of chakra wasn't likely to differentiate between friend and foe. Earth style, layered dome. Earth style, earth spear. Kakuzu felt the drain on his chakra reserves without his earth style heart to cushion the blow with a natural affinity, but he was still perfectly capable of using his defensive techniques. Kakuzu's skin adopted a darker shade as it became harder than diamonds, and several domes of rock rose up to obscure him from the outside world. Whatever that thing was, he would be ready for it. Orochimaru smiled deviously. He had joined Akatsuki in the hopes that he would find a suitable body from among those who opposed the organization, but he never once hoped to find someone as perfect as the Mizukage so soon. 2 bloodlines and a veritable sea of chakra reserves was almost too good to be true. Not that any of those things would help the woman against him. "Just sit still, and I'll make sure that it's over quickly," said Orochimaru as the Mizukage tried to catch her breath. The snake Sannin was looking just as fresh as the moment he arrived on the battlefield, right down to his impeccable Akatsuki cloak. "If you keep resisting, I may opt for some DNA samples rather than your body itself. And killing you outright would be such a shame, Kakuzu. I would rather melt my own body than let you get even a drop of blood," said the Mizukage defiantly. Orochimaru's ridiculous skill and refusal to stay burned, melted, or otherwise rendered dead made him the toughest opponent she had ever faced, but Mei was prepared to go to any extreme to defy Akatsuki, even if it cost her life. Ao's investigations into her predecessor's death had found Akatsuki to be responsible, and she would not disgrace the 4th Mizukage's memory by giving any less than he had. "Too bad you don't really have a say in the matter," said Orochimaru as he snapped his fingers. There was a burst of movement as Orochimaru's snake bit down hard on the Mizukage's neck, causing her to scream in pain. A quick counterattack separated the serpent's head from its body, but the damage was already done. Mei Terumi staggered to the left as her vision began to blur. The poison racing through her veins wouldn't kill her, but she would remain unconscious until Orochimaru administered the antivenom. "I won't take your body now though," said Orochimaru as if she could actually hear him. "As it stands, my current body is far superior, as I just proved. I'll have to make some alterations to unlock your full potential." As Orochimaru hefted the Mizukage's limp body over his shoulder, the building shook violently, threatening to throw Orochimaru off balance. The S-ranked ninja stayed on his feet easily, and only raised an eyebrow as he sensed the massive chakra source. It appeared he would have to take precautions against his new body getting destroyed. Sasori felt pretty good with himself for manipulating the Kage into the perfect position to use his Red Army, but then he realized that the Kage gained just as impressive of an advantage. As it turned out, the wide open space of the roof that allowed Sasori's entire collection to run wild also gave Gaara more room to manipulate his sand. So now Sasori was looking up at the red-headed leader of the village hidden in the sand who was now flying. And while Sasori had wings on his puppet body, they were purely decorative. Well, not decorative per se, but they were pretty useless when it came to actual flight. The blades had been used to great effect when it came to separating body parts from bodies, not to mention that the Kazekage's ultimate defense remained as effective at blocking poison-coated weapons as before. Sasori's water jets were a bit more effective, as getting the sand wet had the added effect of slowing it down, but by this point the Kazekage had enough sand standing by that some of it getting wet wasn't a real issue. Turning the sand to glass with his flamethrowers was little more effective, as it rendered the sand unusable, but Sasori had a limited amount of oil to ignite and throw at his enemies, which left him with the brute force tactic of throwing everything but the kitchen sink at his opponents from over 100 directions at once after covering it in poison. Ironically enough, Sasori did carry around a kitchen sink just so he could say he was always prepared, but he doubted throwing it at the Kazekage would help much. With his skill at sealing things away, it wasn't like it hurt him to bring along a sink. Just as the master puppeteer began to think about making a plan B in case his blitzkrieg of puppets failed, Sasori suddenly found himself fighting in the shade. Looking up once he saw that the Kazekage was doing the same, and not taking advantage of his distraction to win the fight. Sasori looked up to see the massive boulder falling from the sky. Sasori was confident in the ability of his puppet body to survive, especially if he retreated back into Hiriko. Just because it was immobilized didn't make it less effective armor. What is that? Gaara was a bit more preoccupied with the giant meteor falling down on their heads than Sasori was. Sensing no answer forthcoming from his opponent, Gaara raised his hands dramatically, calling forth all the sand he had brought, and all the sand that sand had created by grinding rocks into fine grains. The sand rose into the air like two gigantic hands to catch the meteor and arrest its freefall. It would have likely be unsuccessful anyway, but the Tsuchikage was also trying to catch the meteor. From what Sasori could see of the tiny figure, the Tsuchikage was attempting to catch the meteor with nothing but his bare hands. Sasori was Akatsuki's premier spymaster alongside Zetsudo, and he knew of the old man's ability to alter the mass of objects. It also wouldn't have likely worked, but accompanied by Gaara's sand, the two Kage managed to stop the meteor dead in its tracks. Or they would have, if Sasori didn't take advantage of his opponent's temporary distraction. Sasori's hand snapped off at the wrist to reveal a small compartment that launched wave after wave of Saban. With all of the Kazekage's sand stopping the meteor, he would have none left to guard himself. This turned out to not be the case, however, when the sand that Gaara was standing on instinctively shot up to catch the poison needles. Sasori was never one to bet everything on one simple plan, though. He preferred to have plans within plans within plans. One of his many puppets leapt at the Kazekage from the other side, aiming to impale him with the poisoned katana in its hands. The sand underneath Gaara's feet sprang into action once more, catching the puppet around the middle. It was clear, though, that it was stretched thin, though, as Gaara had sunk up to his knees through the thin layers of sand suspending him in the air. Sasori grinned as he twitched his finger, prompting the last stage of his plan to execute. The puppet's head detached, suspended only by a thin thread of chakra, and spat out a large spike from its mouth as it flew toward the Kazekage. Unable to dodge at such close range, Gaara winced as the poison spike dug into his abdomen. The sand that he had been controlling fell to the ground limply, dropping his body to the roof as he faded out of consciousness. Seconds later, the sand supporting the meteor dropped away too, and the added weight became too much for the Tsuchikage. It began its descent of death once more as the oldest Kage struggled to hold it back, but to no avail. Sasori's red army disappeared in a cloud of smoke, resealed into their scroll. Running forward, Sasori caught the dying Kazekage, quickly injecting him with a large syringe full of a unique poison. In addition to killing more quickly than his main poison, the mixture he injected the Kazekage with now would also act as a weak embalming fluid, giving the master puppeteer more time to begin converting his latest conquest into a work of art that would last for all eternity. Sealing the now dead Kazekage into a scroll, Sasori jumped into his puppet armor before the meteor could crush him and render all his hard work moot. He wasn't too worried about the meteor. Every member of Akatsuki would survive, probably. Deidara dodged another shape as it expanded midair to disintegrate anything caught in its area of effect. The fight had consisted of a lot of dodging, not that that was unexpected. When one ninja could turn opponents to dust if his attacks connected and the other could turn her opponents into bloody explosions if given the chance, it was a battle of who could not get hit longer. The Tsuchikage dropped sharply to avoid the small flock of clay birds that threatened to blow him to smithereens. He brought up his hands to prepare another box of death, when the dust style blinked out of existence. Deidara had been trained by the old man, and had seen him run out of chakra enough times to know what that meant. The leader of the Hidden Rock village still had more chakra than most jonin, but the amount of chakra required to mix 3 elements in perfect balance, and use them to vaporize literally anything used an amount of chakra absolutely ludicrous to any normal ninja. Grinning in victory, Deidara launched her newly crafted bird at the old man who had trained her. The bomb detonated uselessly against his rock armor, and the Tsuchikage prepared his counterattack. Before he could launch rocks upwards to try and knock Deidara out of the sky, the clouds above him burst open, revealing a giant rock that seemed to stretch on for as far as the eye could see. At first Deidara was absolutely terrified. The Tsuchikage had trained her himself, but he had never shown anything even close to this level of technique. Looking to the old man in horror, Deidara noticed that he was equally as shocked by the presence of a meteor in the middle of their battle. Dismissing the idea that the Tsuchikage had summoned the giant meteor, Deidara began to wonder just who had brought this thing onto the battlefield, and whether Akatsuki could survive the impact of the meteor crushing the meeting hall. Deidara! Run! Deidara looked down to see her partner next to a large red toad as he threw a small scroll up to her. The bomber looked at the scroll in her hands in confusion for a second before she saw the small inscription of a toad on the side and remembered the plan. Tossing her newest creation over the side, she jumped onto her experimental 6-winged hummingbird as it grew to a size more appropriate to ride on. She flew off, as giant pillars of sand rose to try and catch the meteor along with its Tsuchikage pouring chakra into Hid Light and Boulder Jutsu to try and stop the giant rock with his bare hands by making it light enough to lift. Deidara knew it wouldn't last though and tried to get as far away as possible before her old mentor lost it. Sure enough, the sand pillars holding up the meteor collapsed soon after, and the giant boulder began its downward motion once more. Deidara barely managed to escape the pull of the giant rock as it soared past, and the wind it generated was another problem entirely. But the wing power of the new hummingbird sculpture was enough to overcome it. The blast of rocky debris from the meteor crushing the meeting hall was massive, and blew Deidara further away from ground zero, something she was actually glad for. She had no idea who had leveled the meeting hall, but she wanted to be as far away from that ninja as possible. She didn't know of any ninja who could use ninjutsu on that level, and was actually harboring doubts as to whether it actually was ninjutsu. Landing in the forest, Deidara dismounted her clay sculpture and pulled out the scroll Naruto had given her. Unrolling the scroll revealed a complex sealing matrix that Deidara didn't want to even begin to understand. The wooden roller of the scroll popped out to reveal a small glass vial full of a red liquid. Deidara removed the stop from the vial and poured the blood onto the sealing matrix. Naruto had assured her that as long as some of the blood ended up anywhere on the seal it would work, but she was cautious and poured the vial out into the dead center of the seal. Running through the seals for summoning, Deidara slammed her hand down on the scroll, gasping as the chakra flowed out. A cloud of smoke erupted from the scroll, and Deidara looked up to come face to face with a large red toad. The amphibian opened its mouth slowly to spit out a blonde wearing a slime-covered Akatsuki cloak. Standing up, Naruto turned to address his ride. Sheesh Gamakichi, when did you last brush your teeth? Use some mouthwash every now and then, it won't kill you. Well, fuck you too, bro, shouted Gamakichi angrily. Geez, you save a guy's life, and that's all the thanks you get? Maybe I should take a page out of Dad's book and start charging you every time you summon me. Naruto rubbed the back of his neck awkwardly. I guess if I start paying you in alcohol, you'll become a raging alcoholic like your old man, eh? Gamakichi brought his hands up quickly. No. I was just joking, bro, said Gamakichi, obviously wanting to be connected with his father in a few ways as possible. Anytime you need help, Gamakichi will be the first to answer the call. Naruto and Gamakichi paused for a second before breaking out into laughter at the same time. Naruto turned to Deidara next. Thanks for that. We'll need to be on top of our game to take out whoever used that meteor ninjutsu. Let's just hope whoever that was doesn't do that again. That technique didn't care about friend or foe. Naruto gestured to the remains of the meeting hall, which had been taken from a multi-level building with large, cavernous rooms to a rocky field covered in rubble. No problem, yeah? Said Deidara flippantly. Let's see if we can find anyone else who survived. Deidara stepped onto her hummingbird, and quickly created an owl for Naruto to ride on. Just as they were about to depart, the bushes parted to reveal Kisame. The shark man had Samahata slung over his shoulder with a limp body lying on the blade. Despite the wounds and general tiredness of Kisame, he wore the huge grin of someone who had just finished enjoying himself immensely. Well, apparently avenging fallen comrades feels pretty good. I'm starting to see the appeal. Kisame's grin drooped a bit though as he continued. But what was that meteor thing? I don't think any of us can do that. Was it one of the Kage? We aren't sure, confessed Naruto, shaking his head. We were just about to look for survivors. Care to join us? Kisame's grin came back full force as he dumped the body resting on Samehada onto the ground, crushing it a bit more with his sword in the process. Sounds fine by me. Let's go crack some heads. The shark joined Naruto on his owl, since Deidara's hummingbird was built entirely for speed and couldn't handle another person. They began the flight back to the meeting hall, or its ruins anyway, and Gamakichi hopped along below, falling farther and farther behind. Don't worry about me, bro. I'll catch up, wheezed the toad as he struggled to keep up and failed miserably. Naruto smirked at his adopted brother's antics. Sure thing. I might even save you a piece of the action, shouted Naruto back down to the toad as he and Kisame approached the ruins of the Land or Iron's meeting hall. They flew over the ruins, looking for anyone who survived the giant rock dropped on the building. Naruto jumped off of his bird, landing next to a pile of rubble. Reaching down with a sigh, he grabbed hold of the legs sticking out of the rocks. Usually anyone underneath the rubble would be dead, but the muffled swearing told Naruto otherwise. Ow ow OW. That fucking hurt. Who dropped a boulder on my head? I'll fucking kill him, shouted Hidan as he tried to pull his scythe out from under the ruins where it was stuck. Nice to see you too, Hidan, said Naruto sarcastically. How did your fight go? Is that even a question? Asked Hidan as he dropped his scythe for a second and raised his fist to the sky. Of course, Jashin's most faithful servant taught those fucking heathens what true suffering is. Turning back around and giving his scythe one last yank, Hidan pulled his weapon of choice out from under the rubble, only a little worse for wear. Yo, look who I found hiding in his bunker, shouted Kisame as he rounded the corner. Following right on his heels was Kakuzu, who did not look happy about being called a coward. I wasn't hiding, I was not being crushed by whatever that was, said Kakuzu gruffly. It was a meteor, said Naruto calmly. We still don't know who summoned it though. I don't suppose it was you? No, replied Kakuzu simply. I just sensed chakra that dwarfed both you and Kisame's chakra reserves combined and decided that getting hit by that would be bad. It appears I underestimated my own Earth-style defenses and didn't hear the commotion end until Kisame cut them all apart. Wait, there was a meteor? When the fuck was this? Asked Hidan. Well, I'm not sure who it was, but you can rule out me and the Mizukage, said Orochimaru as he rose from the ground, creepily close to Hidan, who promptly freaked out. I wonder if any of my subordinates survived. As if triggered by his voice, a pool of water moved out from under the rubble before rising up and taking the form of Suigetsu. Man, now I have to dig up that sword. That's going to take a while, he lamented. Suigetsu looked up and came face to face with half of Akatsuki looking at him like some kind of curiosity, and started to melt back into a puddle. I'll just start looking for that sword then. Just as he was about to dissolve completely, a spear of bone shot out of the same pile of rubble and impaled him through the chest. Not that it really mattered though, as he simply fell to the ground in a rush of water and stood back up several feet to the right. The boulder moved again, and Yugo and Kimimaro emerged, both looking much worse for wear. Kimimaro coughed up some blood, and Yugo collapsed on the ground as his cursed seal retreated. Orochimaru looked to Suigetsu and sighed. Suigetsu, get these two back to base. Kabuto will patch them up. If I see that sword, I'll grab it. Could make for some interesting research material anyway. Suigetsu thought about arguing for a second, then remembered who he would be arguing with and meekly walked over to Yugo and Kimimaro. Picking them up, he began to walk around the members of Akatsuki, trying to not let his eyes off of any of them. As the two of them left, Sasori leapt down from atop some rubble. Well, it appears that we're all meeting up here. So did Konan, Zetsu, and Pain not make it. I must say I'm a bit disappointed in. What was that? Even to a non-sensory type ninja, the explosion of chakra was impossible to miss. Where did that come from? Asked Orochimaru, taken off guard for the first time since joining Akatsuki. There's no way I didn't sense that coming. It just appeared. As a ninja who sensed everything almost perfectly all the time, Naruto took it upon himself to explain it to the less aware Akatsuki, who were all worried about the dwarfing chakra source that had come from nowhere. Whoever that is must have been obscuring their presence. I noticed an area devoid of any chakra before, but I didn't think much of it. Somehow, he can erase his chakra perfectly. It was a worrying skill for an opponent to possess. Suppressing chakra was a normal skill, but erasing its presence completely was almost unheard of, especially when the chakra being hidden was this massive. The ground around them exploded outwards as a massive burst of chakra came out of the huge source of chakra. The members of Akatsuki tried to brace themselves, but the only one to hang on were Kisame and Sasori by stabbing Samehada and his blade wings into the ground respectively. The rest of Akatsuki was sent flying, landing unceremoniously on the ground. Looking up through the channel carved in the ground by the chakra blast, the members of Akatsuki found Zetsu and Konan on either side of the massive chakra source, hidden by their proximity to such an overwhelming force. In the middle stood a man none of them had ever seen before, with blazing red hair and small orbs of incredibly dense black chakra floating behind him. What confused them, though, was the Akatsuki cloak he wore. "Konan, Zetsu! Who is that?" shouted Deidara. Konan looked like she was about to speak up, but the unknown man spoke first, his voice carrying across the battlefield without really yelling. "I am Nagato, God, leader of Akatsuki, and the one who will lead the world to peace." Any doubts vanished as Nagato both referred to Akatsuki's goals and his own godhood with the same exact vindication and belief as Pain had. Looking closer, his eyes were almost identical to Pain's Rinnegan, save for the tomo swirling around the rings. "If you really are Akatsuki's leader, then what happened to Pain? And why are you attacking us?" asked Kakuzu as he began to charge his chakra in case he didn't like the result. "Pain was my less perfect form. This is my real body, capable of using all the powers of Pain and then some. When I sealed the 10 tails inside myself, I cast off that imperfect body for my new immortal one. As for why I attacked you all, I would have thought you would have figured it out by now. I strive for a world of peace. What place would an organization as bloody and violent as Akatsuki have in such a world?" asked Nagato, not waiting for an answer to continue. The 5 Kage summit gathered all the darkness of the ninja world that lies in the open, and Akatsuki gathered the darkness that hides in the shadows. And now all that darkness shall be crushed by the might of God himself. "But then why are Konan and Zetsu with you?" asked Kisame angrily. Past experiences had made the betraying of comrades a touchy subject for him. "Konan understands the goal, and has from the beginning. She joined Akatsuki with the same intentions I did. Zetsu tried to usurp my control of Akatsuki alongside Madara Uchiha, and when I defeated him, Zetsu joined me," explained Nagato. "Madara also yearned for peace, but his would have been a false peace. I shall guide humanity to a better future and rule over it with an iron fist for all eternity." Chapter 25. "Hold on a second," said Kisame, pointing Samehada angrily at Nagato. "Can we go back to the part where you kill us all for a second? Because if you said what I heard, you and I are going to have a problem, God or not. Akatsuki has no place in the world of peace I will create. The purpose of creating Akatsuki was to use it until I had no further need of it, and then dispose of it," replied Nagato simply. "Well, I don't take kindly to people killing comrades," said Kisame as he lowered Samehada and sprinted forward. "I just got done avenging a fallen comrade, and it felt pretty good. But I'd rather not have to do it again." Jumping up, Kisame brought Samehada down with all his might. At the last second, the black liquid around Nagato moved in between them, stopping Samehada dead in its tracks. "Your paltry weapon is nothing before the chakra of the 10 tails," said Nagato. Kisame just smirked. "Bad move trying to block me with chakra. I'll eat it all." Kisame adjusted his grip and pulled, dragging the length of Samehada across the pitch-black chakra shield. To his shock, though, the legendary blade didn't manage to steal any chakra from the barrier. Kisame was forced to twist his sword awkwardly to block the 3 black spikes that shot out from the black shield and attempted to impale him. Samehada got in the way, though, and the spikes failed to penetrate the legendary blade, instead launching Kisame backwards. Skidding to a stop, Kisame swung his sword like an oversized club to smack away the black orbs of chakra into the ground as they came flying at him. "What was that?" asked the shark man incredulously. "Samehada didn't get any of that weird chakra." "Fuck if I care, but I know this," shouted Hidan as he ran at Nagato, dragging his scythe along the ground as he went. "There's only one God, and that's goddamn Jashin." Hidan jumped up and swung his scythe downwards at the self-proclaimed god. "Fool," said Nagato simply as the black chakra of the 10 tails flowed around him to catch the scythe. Rather than simply be stopped like Samehada had been, the blood-red scythe disappeared into the black chakra and kept going as if the barrier wasn't even there. When it would have emerged from the black shield, it simply didn't, and Hidan was left holding a short spike. Nagato raised his hand menacingly, and a black rod shot out of his sleeve. A simple twist of his wrist snapped the rod, and the 10 tails jinchuriki brought the weapon down. "That idiot," said Kakuzu emotionlessly. Despite his berating of Hidan, his right hand shot out and caught the immortal zealot, yanking him out of the way. The trip back to the group of betrayed Akatsuki members wasn't gentle, and anyone other than Hidan would have likely been incredibly injured after being pulled along the ground. "If anyone in this world can kill you, it's him, and we'll need everyone alive if we want to stand any chance of winning." Hidan sat up sharply, covered in cuts and bruises. "Well, that still hurt you, fucker. And that son of a bitch destroyed my scythe, too." Nagato calmly pulled the black rod out of the ground that it had impaled in place of Hidan. "Konan, Zetsu. Take them out," he commanded simply, not giving the other members of Akatsuki any breathing room. Konan took to the skies silently, looking a bit sad, and Zetsu saluted happily, or at least half of him did. "Aye, sir." "Will do," said the bicolored man as he slid into the ground. "We need a plan if we don't want to all die here and now," growled Kisame as he prepared Samehada to block any incoming attacks. "One thing's for sure, we'll need as many of us as we can spare to take on pain. 2 of us need to keep Zetsu and Konan at bay in the meantime. I'll take care of the angel," said Deidara as her clay creation began to hover above the ground. "That stupid paper crap isn't anything even resembling art. Besides, I'm the only one who can fly." No one objected, and Deidara took to the skies to confront the only other female in Akatsuki in a battle for aerial supremacy. Naruto reacted suddenly, shattering the ground with a single punch and taking the others off guard. Zetsu in particular was surprised by the attack and barely managed to get out of the way before sinking back into the ground. "I can see through Aloe Vera's hiding techniques. He isn't a frontline fighter, so I should be able to help you out once I'm done." "Fine by me, but there won't be much left for you," replied Kisame tersely as he spun Samehada around a bit. "I'm not going to go easy on this traitor." Blue spikes emerged from Samehada's hilt as the blade slowly began to merge with its owner. Kakuzu discarded his Akatsuki cloak in a single fluid movement as the threads that lurked under his skin burst out, segmenting his arms and placing the remaining lightning-style mask over his shoulder. Kakuzu's speak was surprisingly understandable as he spoke around the mass of black threads fanning out of his mouth. "I wonder how much a god is worth." Hidan stood up and wheeled his arm to loosen it up. "Well, this poser isn't a damn god, so don't get your hopes up too much, Kakuzu. I suppose the leader of Akatsuki should be worth a bit though." "To Jashin!" shouted Hidan as he raised his ruined scythe to the skies. "My art is eternal," said Sasori as he pulled out the scrolls that contained his 2 Kazekage puppets. The sand would make the movements of his favorite puppets jerky, but without the 5th Kazekage controlling the sand, it would likely fall out during the course of battle. "Its perseverance in the face of you trying to destroy it will prove the worth of my art." In dual clouds of smoke, the S-ranked puppeteer was flanked by the weaponized corpses of 2 other S-ranked ninja. "As long as I can have those eyes for my research," said Orochimaru as he bit his thumb and ran through the hand seals that made him a snake summoner. "Besides, I haven't accomplished my goals yet, so I'm afraid you'll have to be the one who has to die." When the smoke cleared, Orochimaru was standing atop a giant purple snake with 4 large horns. "I don't see 100 sacrifices here, Orochimaru," complained Manda loudly. "Give me one good reason not to eat you right here and now." "You're right, of course," conceded the Sannin nonchalantly. "Now that I think about it, you probably wouldn't have been much help against this opponent anyway. You'll pay for insulting my prowess later, but for now I'll show you the power of the snakes." Orochimaru grinned before spitting up a smaller snake. This snake in turn spat out a double-sided blade that Orochimaru caught out of the air. Nagato looked on at the 5 S-ranked ninja in front of him that were prepared to kill him with supreme confidence. "Perhaps you could provide enough of a challenge to at least let me get a decent warm-up. But know this. If you insist on fighting me, your deaths will be even more painful." With his warning out of the way, Nagato manipulated one of the black orbs of the 10 tails volatile chakra into a solid black shakujo that likely held the same disintegrating properties as the corrosive chakra. "Now then, your death shall usher in an era of peace the likes of which this world has never seen." Konan and Deidara sized each other up, each with several of their creations flying around them. "So I get that Nagato is crazy now, but why are you following him?" asked Deidara as several of her clay birds were hit by paper shuriken. The 4-pointed paper did little to affect the clay creatures, but Deidara had no doubt they would be as lethal as any metal weapon. World peace was the dream of Akatsuki's first leader, and the goal that Nagato follows as well. This is the only way, and I will support that bridge to peace. With that, Konan launched another wave of paper shuriken at Deidara. The sheer number of origami weapons was too much for her suicidal birds to catch in their bodies, and Deidara dove sharply to avoid the paper shuriken. "Oh, so you're just crazy too. Good to know, yeah?" Deadpan Deidara as she sent her birds flying towards Konan. The blue-haired Akatsuki member swung her arms down and launched 6 more shuriken, one at each of the birds, and hit them all dead on. These bits of paper began to sizzle before exploding violently. The clay pieces of art were too volatile to survive an explosion without giving in to their own unstable tendencies, and they all detonated a safe distance away from Konan. Gritting her teeth, Deidara dodged to the right and avoided more paper shuriken that exploded shortly after passing her. "I was going to kill you for trying to kill me and my friends, but now it's personal. You'll pay for ripping off my art." Tossing out 2 small 4-winged birds, Deidara sent her next attack at Konan. The paper counterattack was expected, and the faster pieces of art easily dodged the wave of shuriken. The mobile bombs exploded in Konan's face, and she remained as emotionless as ever as she exploded into a flurry of paper and reformed several meters away. Deidara flipped off of her mount to avoid the barrage of paper weaponry that embedded itself into the clay sculpture Deidara had been riding. Deidara stopped her freefall by creating another large bird to fly on, this one a simple hawk, and sent her previous mount hurtling towards the paper angel. More exploding tags took the bird down, but the chakra held inside it was able to cause an explosion that Konan had to turn to paper to dodge. Reforming her torso and wings, Konan looked around frantically for Deidara, though it didn't show on her face. "You think that paper crap is art?" Konan looked down, and her eyes widened as a large hawk barreled into her neck and carried her high into the air. "I'll turn you into real art, yeah." Deidara immediately popped more clay into the mouth on her hand as the hawk exploded high in the air. The explosion scattered the sheets of paper that made up Konan's body, and she took longer than usual to reform. Deidara put the time to good use, pumping as much chakra as she could into the clay she was chewing. It was obvious that it would take a masterpiece to finish Konan off for good, and even though chewing the clay with a tongue that could actually taste made her want to gag, it was a small price to pay for ending this fight. And now that they had enough altitude, the chance of anyone else getting caught in the blast was almost non-existent. Konan reformed above Deidara, who seemed to be intently chewing on something. Bursting into a maelstrom of paper, Konan descended on Deidara. The mad bomber seemed to panic, looking around frantically for a way out. Nagato's right hand flooded into existence behind Deidara, but kept her right hand flying around. Forming her right arm into a spike of chakra-enhanced paper, Konan stabbed forward, hitting Deidara right in the heart with little resistance. The blonde jerked, falling slowly backwards as the paper user formed fully. Konan berated herself for letting her guard down as the Deidara she had stabbed turned stark white, and quickly reached behind her head to grab the blue-haired origami master. Melting into a more fluid clay, the clone melded around Konan into a solid ball of white clay. As Konan tried in vain to free herself from the clay clone trap, the real Deidara rose up from inside the bird. Opening her mouth as if to talk, Deidara instead spat out a deluge of clay as if she were throwing up. The clay messily covered Konan up entirely, leaving no hope of escape. Wiping any stray clay from her lips, Deidara smirked in victory. "This is real art." With her last quip delivered, Deidara fell backwards off of the hawk, activating her C4 on the way down. Looking up as she plummeted to earth, Deidara saw the large poof of white smoke as her C4 exploded and saw Konan leave quickly before diving after her. Creating an eagle to glide on, Deidara formed a basic seal to focus her chakra on detonating the C4 for real. Konan was in the process of pursuing Deidara when the dud bomb form earlier took effect. Her hands were the first thing to go, dissolving not into paper like usual, but a fine dust instead. The decay traveled up the Akatsuki member's arms as she looked on in horror. By the time she would have reached the mad bomber responsible for her fate, Konan was no more. Deidara's eagle turned and wheeled towards the others that were in the process of fighting a god, intent of assisting them in any way possible. Naruto soon learned that just because he could sense Zetsu didn't mean that the plant man wouldn't run away. Channeling as much chakra as he could to his legs to increase speed, Naruto caught up to the underground spy. Punching the ground into chunks, Naruto grabbed the Venus flytrap and threw him bodily into the air. Running through some hand seals to end this quickly, Naruto inhaled deeply. Sage art, vegetable slicer. The blades of sharp wind Naruto exhaled chopped the white Akatsuki member into hundreds of indistinguishable bits. The impromptu name change to the technique was an indulgence on his part, but the results were as impressive as ever. "You really shouldn't let your guard down like that." Naruto jumped away from the voice behind him as the speaker's chakra slowly began to stand out from the ambient chakra around them. And you shouldn't worn out opponents like that. Now that clone died for nothing. We have more. Standing there, perfectly untouched, was Zetsu, in all his multicolored glory. Looking more closely at the chopped-up plant, and sure enough, there were no pieces of black. More stark white clones began to rise out of the ground, only appearing to Sage Mode's sensory abilities as they stepped out of the ground entirely. Not wasting any time with talk, Naruto began to tear the Zetsus apart. Luckily, the clones were much easier to kill than the original, who stood calmly as the clone army was ripped to pieces. Once about half of the weak warriors had fallen, Zetsu finally spoke, albeit to himself. Your clones aren't doing much other than finding new ways to die. Would you like me to step in? Raising the white arm up to his chin in thought, Zetsu carefully responded. I suppose you could help a little, but don't go finishing him off right away. Clapping his hands together, Black Zetsu began his attack. Naruto wasn't at liberty to watch closely, as he was still crushing skulls and punching Zetsu clones into orbit. Wood style, deep forest emergence. The scale of the technique was infinitely smaller than when Zetsu had used it against the Three Tails, but it was no less powerful. The roots of Zetsu's lower body dug into the ground and burrowed towards Naruto, leaping out of the soil intermittently like dolphins. Naruto threw a Zetsu clone at the tree roots to gauge their power and eliminate another clone. The white Zetsu clone was mowed down and pinned to the ground by a root thicker around than he was. Blanching at the thought of that happening to him, Naruto brought his hands together in a single seal. Sage Art, Majestic Flame Devastation. The wall of flames went flying at the oncoming trees. The two met and pushed against each other, battling for dominance. In an impressive feat, the wooden trees actually withstood the inferno, though their forward progress halted. Wow, that was impressive, said Zetsu as he popped out of the wood and lunged at Naruto. The sage had plenty of time to react and snapped the sharpened stick that Zetsu was using in half as he dodged to the side. Twirling the weapon, Naruto plunged it into Zetsu's forehead, hurling the wood-style user back. Zetsu slowly stood up, a remarkable accomplishment considering the spike embedded in his face. Reaching up, Zetsu pulled the spike out and dropped it to the ground. Man, that hurt. Then maybe you shouldn't rush in like that. Naruto was confident in his ability to win, as he could always fall back to the Nine Tails chakra if he truly had to, but Zetsu's healing factor was beginning to become worrying. Naruto extended his senses, trying to see if he was far enough away from the other Akatsuki members to safely use the Nine Tails chakra. Deciding it was safe, Naruto prepared to grab hold of the volatile chakra of the most powerful tailed beast. Just as he was about to don the golden aura, tendrils of wood shot up out of the ground, taking Naruto by surprise. He had taken for granted Sage Mode's ability to sense incoming attacks, but the wood style was close enough to natural chakra of the earth that the techniques almost blended in perfectly with the surrounding soil. It was painfully obvious in the air, but by then it was too late. The wooden tendrils held Naruto by the wrists and ankles, stretching him out like a prisoner to be interrogated. Zetsu approached him, one half menacingly, the other half downright giddy. It's been forever since I've had natural chakra. This is going to be fantastic. Your Sage Mode will mesh nicely with this body. IT will make taking out your allies even easier. Naruto simply grimaced as Zetsu's white half placed a hand on his chest and began to siphon his chakra. Zetsu's main body could absorb chakra at a much faster rate than his clones, but it would still be quite a while before Naruto was out of chakra completely. Naruto tried to break out of the roots, but Black Zetsu kept the roots supplied by chakra to prevent them from breaking. Everything seemed to be going well for Zetsu, and red marking began to appear around his eye, though Black Zetsu seemed unaffected. Then things went south quickly. White Zetsu's flesh began to elongate in random places, taking on a darker tint to resemble actual tree bark. Zetsu's eyes widened in horror as the tree-like growths began to consume more and more of him. The white hand that had been draining chakra recoiled and tried in vain to hold the transformation back. Black Zetsu pulled back as well, separating himself from his other half as White Zetsu completed the transformation into a large tree. Without the roots being held together by a constant supply of chakra, Naruto was easily able to break out of the wood-style trap. I suppose in the end, you can't even depend on yourself, muttered Black Zetsu as he looked at the tree that used to be his left side. Black Zetsu turned to Naruto, who was trying to regain the chakra that White Zetsu had stolen. I'll only warn you once, don't underestimate me. Black Zetsu made a single hand seal, and his lower body transformed into tree roots that began to attack Naruto. Naruto flipped his way through the roots, dodging the tendrils that tried to grab a hold of him. He was largely successful, though one root did manage to nab his ankle. Taking advantage of the grip, Black Zetsu smashed Naruto into the ground again and again. Sage Mode was easily able to withstand the attack, and Naruto whipped out a kunai in between hits to cut the root. Naruto landed on one hand, flinging himself to the side to avoid any more wood-style trees. Skidding to a stop, Naruto decided to end it here. Black Zetsu stared ahead as Naruto formed a single-hand seal, and his roots closed in on their prey. A split second later though, and Naruto was gone in a flash of gold. In addition to his biological limitations, Black Zetsu didn't have time to widen his eyes before Naruto reappeared directly in front of him, apparently on fire and holding an orb of pure black chakra that seemed more massive than it actually was. "Impossible! We sealed the tailed beasts!" exclaimed Black Zetsu before Naruto rammed the miniature-tailed beast ball into his gut. Black Zetsu could feel the wood-style body that he was inhabiting begin to fall apart, and even the will of Madara that was his very essence started to fade. "Guess you missed one? Don't worry, it'll be our little secret," said Naruto before releasing the chakra. Instead of slowly grinding away, the tailed beast chakra was channeled in a massive beam that vaporized Zetsu entirely. Naruto let the Nine Tails chakra mode fade, and looked down at his tattered Akatsuki cloak. Throwing it off, Naruto donned his red and black sage's cloak before running off to try and kill a god. Kakuzu ran through some seals as the mouth on the mask over his shoulder opened with a sharp crack. Lightning style, false darkness. Kakuzu had no hope of this actually killing Nagato, that would be too easy, but it was intended to size up the god before him. With hardly any effort, Nagato swept the black chakra of the 10 tails in front of the beam of lightning, which hit the chakra and didn't emerge. "That's a stupid name for a technique," grumbled Sasori, before launching a wave of fire out of his palms. The flames disappeared the moment they touched the corrosive chakra as well, but it did keep Nagato in place. The best thing about having the flamethrowers on his palms was that Sasori's fingers were still free to control his puppets, albeit with less control than normal. Secret red technique, golden darkness. The sand of the two Kazekage puppets he had wove together and flew towards the former leader of Akatsuki, both black as pitch and as bright as the sun at the same time. The stream of mixed sand came in from both sides, aiming to take advantage of the flames that were keeping the 10 tails chakra busy in the front. Unfortunately, the massive attack that would have sent armies running in fear was defeated by Nagato simply raising his hand, stopping the sand for a split second before it was sent flying away. Sasori had to cease the onslaught of flames in order to better control his Kazekage puppets. The alternative was not having the control over the gold dust and iron sand he needed to prevent accidentally poisoning his allies as they moved into attack. Kisame and Orochimaru came in from the right and the left as the stream of sand parted around them without leaving so much as a scratch. Kisame had fused with Samahata, and the chakra-eating properties that protected the legendary sword from being destroyed by the liquid black hole around Nagato before protected him now as he battered away at the shield with his forearms. Orochimaru, meanwhile, tried to hit Nagato through the deadly chakra with his own legendary sword. Kusanagi was able to cut anything, and it was covered by a poison deadlier than anything even Sasori had ever created. Unfortunately, the liquid nature of the chakra meant that the cuts left by Kusanagi were about as permanent as a cut in the ocean. This also left the sword unable to really defend against much, and Orochimaru was constantly backpedaling in an attempt to not be erased from existence. "Fucking die already!" shouted Hidan as he threw what remained of his scythe's handle like a spear. Hidan pulled on the cord attached to the spike as the black chakra came up to eat the rest of the Jashinist's weapon, stopping the spike less than an inch away from its demise and yanking it back to his hand. Hidan kept running though, taking advantage of the window presented by the window Nagato opened to retain some visibility. Kakuzu was impressed by the thought that had apparently gone into Hidan's plan, and the bounty hunter was downright floored when it worked. The scratch healed almost instantly and Hidan got his arm cut off for his troubles, but the immortal zealot had managed to procure a drop or two of blood. The cord to his weapon had been severed by the black chakra closing in along with Hidan's right arm, but he had apparently even thought that out as well, and Hidan whipped the severed cord to wrap around his arm and pull it back with him as he retreated. Orochimaru and Kisame did likewise, not eager to remain in the line of fire for longer than needed. The former hidden waterfall ninja felt the need to congratulate his partner for once. That was surprising well thought out. "End it now though, we don't have time for your rituals." Hidan grinned at the praise and raised the spike high into the air, still held by his severed arm. "Praise to Jashin, for allowing me to strike down this blasphemer in his name." Just as he was about to bring down the bloodied weapon and ingest the blood for his ritual, A laser of pure chakra enveloped the detached limb and weapon. When the beam faded, any blood on the weapon was gone, and the scythe handle itself was melted down slag. The Akatsuki members looked up to see Nagato's hand reverting back to the 5 digits and a palm that they all had from a small cannon that had no doubt been responsible for destroying the blood. Hidan brought down the slag and frantically started chewing on it, apparently hoping to get some blood out of it. Unfortunately, some of the melted weapon was still molten. "Oh sweet Jashin, that burns. Kakuzu, put my arm back on. I'll show this bastard what happens when he burns my mouth." Any other day, Kakuzu would have objected, or done an intentionally shoddy job, but these were dire straits, and a thread snaked its way over to sew the severed arm back on as lightning continued to fire over his head to try and keep Nagato at bay. Sasori attempted to use his sand to exploit any openings, but between Orochimaru, Kisame, and now the rearmed Hidan, there wasn't much room for his sand to go on the offensive. Instead, the puppeteer opted to use his sand defensively, blocking the black rods and acting as platforms for the other 3 close-range combatants to maneuver with. It was largely unsatisfying, and he actually found himself wishing for the other to fall back so he could stretch his collection. Nagato was caught off guard for the first time in the fight when Manda burst out of the ground beneath him, attempting to swallow Akatsuki's former leader, and anything that was too close. Nagato raised his hands up as the jaws of the serpent closed around him to force the snake's jaws open. Manda dislocated his jaw to keep it from being ripped off, and the leader of the snakes fell to the ground, leaving Nagato inexplicably hovering in the sky. The god clapped his hands together, slowly pulling them apart to reveal a minuscule black orb. The sphere floated in the air as Nagato gently descended back to the ground, where Manda was wrapped around the entire area, leaving no escape. Suddenly, Manda began to feel lighter and lighter before being lifted off the ground entirely. Looking up, the small black orb of condensed gravity was pulling every bit of loose rock towards it, and even some rock that wasn't loose at all. The Akatsuki members were stuck to the ground with chakra, but the ground they were anchored to didn't have that advantage. "Aim your strongest attacks at the center," shouted Sasori. "If we can destroy the weak point, we can escape this." Sasori started the barrage with a wave of gold dust and iron sand. Kakuzu followed up with an electrified blast of water, and Kisame launched a frenzy of sharks made of water. Manda struck out with his own body, and Orochimaru's sword elongated to ridiculous proportions to stab at the black orb of death. The attacks all collided in a magnificent explosion that Deidara would have been proud of, and the pieces of rock that the Akatsuki members stood on stopped rising for a second before falling back to earth. Once they landed, the landscape was even more devastated than it had been before. Nagato seemed mildly amused at the destruction of his technique. He ran through some familiar hand seals and slammed his palms on the ground, summoning a giant 2-headed dog and an equally enormous rhino in a cloud of smoke. The rhino barreled towards the recovering Akatsuki members, who were trying to catch their breath and their chakra after escaping the miniature moon. The rhino was dispersed in a cloud of smoke before it could reach them, however, by a massive purple viper falling from the sky. Manda broke his fall with the other massive summoned, and began to square off against the dog, a little singed and sore, but otherwise no worse for wear. The dog went in biting, but Manda slithered around the straightforward attack and wrapped himself around the dog, holding it in place. Manda's mouth opened wide as he sunk his fangs into the creature, injecting it with his deadly venom. The poison was deadly to anything, even when diluted, and would have no doubt killed any regular summon. The 2-headed hound had a trick though, and the attack caused it to simply grow another head and split into 3 separate dogs. The added mass stretched Manda's coils thin, but he managed to hold onto the dogs, who continued to nip at any part of him they could reach. The leader of the snakes could feel himself being pulled back to Ryuchi Cave as the injuries sustained by diving into a barrage of high-leveled ninjutsu began to take effect. At this point it was only stubborn pride keeping him on the battlefield. Kisame noticed the struggle, and rode towards the struggling summons on a wave of water. The smaller wave was the product of a technique designed to increase the mobility of his fused form, and keep the even fishier ninja hydrated. Nearing the Battle of Giants, Kisame ran his rough skin against each of the dogs, draining them of all the chakra that had been used to summon them. His blue skin bulked up slightly with the massive quantities of chakra he had absorbed, and Nagato's puppies disappeared in a cloud of smoke. Sensing his battle was over as well, Manda returned to his home as well. The Akatsuki members faced off against the man who had led them for years, back to square one in this fight. Just as they were about to recommit themselves to the offensive, Nagato's black chakra moved to block an incoming wave of water. They all looked up to find the attacker, and were greeted by the sight of an exhausted red toad. The most interesting thing, though, was the fact that unlike everything else in existence, the Black Ten Tails chakra seemed unable to absorb the water bullet, instead blocking it like any other shield. Orochimaru's golden snake eyes widened at the sight, realizing that they might have a way to actually harm him other than Kusanagi and Samehada, which hadn't been doing much so far. A hand seal had him body flickering to the toad's location, while the other Akatsuki members kept on the offensive. Kakuzu and Sasori provided ranged support for Hidan and Kisame, and pulled the close-range combatants out of the way with sand and threads whenever things got too close. Tell me, little froggy, was that technique just now fueled by natural chakra? And where is Jiraiya? Asked Orochimaru, dispensing of any urge to mess with his former teammates' summons given the urgency of the situation. Wait, Jiraiya's here? Asked Gamakichi in surprise. That jerk still owes me candy from last time. Gamakichi looked up into Orochimaru's glare, and decided to just answer the questions. Why yeah, that was natural chakra. It ain't sage mode or anything, but I'm pretty good at drawing it in real quick for a water bullet and stuff. Orochimaru's grin was downright disturbing, and Gamakichi nervously spoke up again. That was the last of my chakra though, so I'll just be going now. Orochimaru ignored the puff of smoke behind him as he turned to survey the battlefield. The Sannin wasn't able to handle sage mode in a stolen body, a fact he had discovered only after taking a new body to prolong his life. Luckily, the mad scientist in him had discovered a way around the limitations of his body. Yugo's bloodline allowed him to do something impossible, gather natural chakra constantly. It wasn't great enough in volume or mixed correctly to enter sage mode, but he was far more in touch with nature than anyone else in the world. Unfortunately for him, when the natural chakra stored became too great, it was released, giving Yugo great strength and reverting him to a more violent personality to better empty his reserves of natural chakra. By utilizing Yugo's blood, Orochimaru was able to create his curse seal. Any body he took from then on was still unable to use actual sage mode, but Yugo's slightly less powerful transformation was easily accessible. He had never really had reason to care that it was run off of natural chakra until now, but the ability to make his techniques immune to the liquid black hole surrounding Nagato was worth it. Concentrating on the black mark hidden beneath his most recent body's skin, Orochimaru allowed the transformation to take over. Let's see how the god deals with a technique that transcends snakes to become a dragon god, mumbled Orochimaru. Nagato's battle paused as the combatants looked up to where the toad had been a second ago to see the massive 8-headed white snake that dwarfed even Manda. Kisame and Hidan wisely got out of the way as the snake barreled down on Nagato with a speed that a creature that size should not possess. All of the black orbs around Nagato fused together to form a massive sword of deadly chakra shaped like a double helix. The pitch black sword swung horizontally in an attempt to cut off all of the snake's heads in one go, but the white serpent reeled back to dodge. One of the mouths near the middle opened wide to reveal Orochimaru fused to the bottom of the snake's mouth. His curse seal was ridiculous compared to the others, even Yugo's, but Orochimaru never was one to give the best toys to others. Orochimaru brought an elongated sword of Kusanagi down at Nagato, who simply moved to the side to avoid the downward swing. The black blade stabbed outwards to sever one of the snake's heads, and Orochimaru winced in pain as the feeling came towards him. The loss wouldn't translate to losing any parts of his body when he transformed back, but it still hurt. Two of the mouths next to him opened wide and launched a massive fireball enhanced by a wave of wind. The collaboration technique roared past the Ten Tails chakra that tried to block it, intent on incinerating Nagato. The red head was obscured by the inferno, which died down far more quickly than it should have. When the flames disappeared, Nagato was left standing with one hand outstretched as if he had stopped the technique with one hand. 3 of the remaining heads on the snake struck out with the speed of lightning, only to be rewarded with a black sword severing them in a spray of blood. The snake was 4 heads down, and only had 4 left. Orochimaru grit his teeth and prepared the best technique he could under the conditions. The 3 remaining heads that wouldn't kill him if they launched a technique fired off blasts of water, lightning, and wind so massive that they put Kakuzu's attacks to shame. The 3 combined into a fast-moving wave of paralyzing death, and was quickly absorbed into Nagato's hand once more. This time, though, Kisame and Hidan took advantage of the fact that such a devastating technique was only a temporary distraction. Hidan lost his other arm this time as Nagato attempted to react in time, but both he and Kisame landed solid blows against the self-proclaimed god that would have ended the fight against any normal opponent, draining chakra and gaining precious blood that Hidan promptly licked off of his black spike. Unfortunately, Nagato was not a normal opponent. Hidan stood up to start drawing the ritual circle in his own blood so he could just stab himself and end this. Before either he or Kisame could react though, Nagato had recovered from his injury and moved incredibly fast right behind Hidan. Placing his hand solemnly on Hidan's head, Nagato inhaled deeply before yanking something out. It appeared to be an outline of Hidan made entirely of chakra, and the Jashinist fell to the ground immediately upon its removal. Orochimaru noticed this and struck out with all 4 remaining head of the 8 branches technique, trying to end the fight while Hidan before Nagato could return any attention to the snake Sannin. One quick turn and slice was enough to separate the remaining heads from the body, which writhed in pain before becoming still. Orochimaru ejected himself from the mouth of the white serpent midair at great speed. Its purpose served, the black sword melted back into the orbs of 10 tails chakra that hovered ominously behind Nagato's back. I believe you've pushed me as far as you will. I grow bored with this attempt to fight me, as if you were even close to my level, and will end it at once. Suffice to say, you won't be alright. Chapter 26. Naruto hadn't realized just how far away Zetsu had lured him until he had to run all the way back. The sheer amount of chakra being thrown around wasn't helping the sage get an accurate picture of what was going on with the others. He could detect the pulses of chakra from individual techniques, but Nagato's omnipresent chakra prevented Naruto from sensing individuals and locations from this distance. Sensing a familiar and volatile chakra coming towards him quickly, Naruto held up his hand. Deidara grabbed a hold of him and swung him onto the clay bird that continued towards Nagato's location without missing a beat. Can you sense anything? Obviously they didn't kill Nagato, even I can feel the chakra. But how are they doing? Yeah, I really can't tell. Nagato's chakra is still there and I can sense the others are still alive, but not much. Naruto's eyes widened in shock and his mouth dropped open slightly. Hurry, what just happened? Asked Deidara frantically as her clay mount began to go even faster than its previous breakneck pace. Hidan's chakra signature just vanished, said Naruto. I don't know how, but it's gone. No way. Hidan's immortal, yeah? Asked Deidara. There's just no way he's dead. Either way, we have to get there now, said Naruto as the color drained from his face. He hoped that they could stop Nagato without having to pull out all the stops, but he was beginning to fear that Akatsuki couldn't stop their former leader even if he used the 9 tails chakra that had so easily dominated his fight with Zetsu. After all, if he could kill Hidan, Nagato might not be cocky in his power, but rightfully confident. Kakuzu was shocked to see Hidan dead. It was such a strange and alien concept that the swearing Jashinist could be killed that he figured the closest thing to an immortal in the world would be the last of them to go down, and even then only being incapacitated. On a positive note, now Kakuzu knew not to let Nagato touch him at all. That wasn't much of a consolation prize though. He found himself glad that he had comrades on the way to assist them in fighting this monster, and wondered when Naruto and Deidara would be getting here. Kakuzu found it odd that he didn't consider the very real possibility of them abandoning the members of Akatsuki that had stayed to fight Nagato for even a second. Nor did he think that Zetsu and Konan would win, despite his views on experience prevailing above all. The bomber and the sage were powerful allies, and he only hoped that they would be able to make it in time. The bounty hunter swore to himself that he would be standing when they arrived. You came close, but none can stand before the might of a god for long, said Nagato calmly as he blasted his former subordinates away simply by narrowing his ringed eyes. The 4 Akatsuki members were sent flying head over heels by the raw power that collided with them, and not even Orochimaru could slither around the attack. The force subsided, and Orochimaru skidded to a halt some distance away. He observed Nagato grow another limb, similar to before when he destroyed the remains of Hidan's scythe. Orochimaru's eye widened as he spit out a spare body just as the previous one was incinerated in a beam of light he couldn't even follow. The Sannin didn't even bother to predict where the blast would hit, and slithered along the ground in random directions as fast as he could. Not looking where he was going, however, had an unfortunate side effect. When the blast stopped, Orochimaru stood up, only to come face to face with Nagato, who quickly reached out with his right hand. Reacting with the speed of a striking viper, Orochimaru grabbed a hold of Nagato's wrist with both hands in an attempt to prevent his soul form being ripped out. He absent-mindedly wondered if Nagato could rip his soul via his arms, maybe even taking just the arms, but decided that that would just be stupid, not to mention weird. Nagato tried to raise his left hand, but Orochimaru opened his mouth wider than should be biologically possible and mentally commanded Kusanagi to extend out. The legendary blade impaled the god's wrist and continued on to stick deeply into the ground. Orochimaru worried for a second that his guess had been wrong, and that Nagato would simply grow another arm and remove his soul, but the seconds passed, and all that was proven lacking was Orochimaru's strength as Nagato's hand inched slowly towards the Sanin's chest, but not his theories. Nagato had ridiculously strong abilities even beyond the black chakra of the 10 tails. He never would have united the members of Akatsuki under him as pain otherwise. But whether it was the power of the abilities themselves or the added stress of holding back the 10 tails, Nagato could only use one ability at a time. Grinning in victory, Orochimaru breathed out a thick purple smog around Tsunade. The poison was a potent, not that it would have any effect on Orochimaru, but one that would likely slow Nagato down, if not outright kill him. Nagato tried to pull back, but now Orochimaru wasn't holding Nagato's wrist back, he was holding it in place. The snake Sannin wasn't as feared as he was for relying on one plan though, and he decided to enact all of them at once just in case being the 10 tails jinchuriki came with some kind of toxic immunity privilege. The palm on his hand opened, biting down on Nagato's wrist and injecting it with Orochimaru's chakra. The chakra wasn't naturally explosive like Deidara's, but the ability to manipulate the chakra was still there. Commanding Nagato's arm to remain still for a second wouldn't work for long, but it would do for the time being. Orochimaru had Tsunade contract in the opposite direction, the hilt shooting out of his mouth to keep Nagato stuck while Orochimaru executed his next move. Another body emerged, fingertips alight with small flames. Let's see if we can do something about that pesky 10 tails. 5-pronged seal. Orochimaru's hand shot out at blinding speeds to add additional pillars of support to the 10 tails seal in hopes of cutting off Nagato's connection to the beast, or at least hampering it in some way should he survive the poison on Tsunade and the poison in the air. Centimeters before Orochimaru's finger came into contact with Nagato's skin, a blast of chakra sent Orochimaru flying and dispersed the poison in the air. Stiffly moving his arm as Orochimaru's chakra left his system, Nagato removed Tsunade, the wound closing up quickly without so much as a drop of blood escaping the wound. Tumbling head over heels, Orochimaru tumbled to a stop, only to be enveloped in a brilliant beam of pure chakra. When the dust settled, Orochimaru was gone. A smoking crater was all that remained of the Sannin. As Nagato's right hand reassembled into a 5-digit appendage, the black 10 tails chakra formed a ring around him to dissolve the poison ninja wire, all but invisible to the naked eye that tried to wrap around him. The corrosive chakra did little to stop the barrage of poisoned weapons from being launched against him, but they did little against the impenetrable shield of chakra that broke down all the Senbon and Kunai. Nagato looked to see the 2 puppets that dodged his counterattack fervently, not letting themselves be touched anymore. The 2 were relatively simple humanoids clad in red cloaks with fur collars. The female-looking puppet had long brown hair while the male puppet had short red hair similar to Sasori's, though it was a common enough hair color in the hidden sand. The limp ninja wire that used to connect the 2 had been severed, and the 2 drew their own unique weapons. Nagato was surprised to see an ornate serrated katana and a custom-made kunai-covered whip. These 2 puppets showed more care put into them than even the Kage puppets that Sasori had been using, which made Nagato wary of what powerful abilities they had, and why they hadn't used them yet. I suspect you gathered information on our abilities via Zetsu. Unfortunately for you, I have plenty of secrets. Though I don't really want to see mother and father destroyed, so I'll just bring my best against you. It took a lot of work to get these out of the hidden sand, I'll have you know, said Sasori, as he removed a scroll and unfurled it. The 10 seals exploded in a cloud of smoke. The name might seem strange, but I didn't feel like doing away with tradition. White's Secret Art, Chikamatsu Collection. I've yet to make any puppet this powerful. Each one could elevate a lesser puppeteer to S rank. In the hands of a master, they'll spell you doom. Clad in bright white cloaks, the puppets stood out against Sasori's usual red. Each one was unique, and Nagato was now outnumbered as Kisame joined the puppets, hefting Samahata menacingly. Twitching his fingers like a conductor, Sasori had 5 of the puppets, joined by Kisame, rushed the self-proclaimed god. A puppet with long black hair shot its own hand off, connected via cable, and grabbed a hold of an orb that a red-faced puppet spat out. 4 giant chakra blades began to rotate quickly around the sphere, which was swung at Nagato. Raising his hand casually, Nagato drained the chakra from the deadly blades, and caught the orb before yanking the black-haired puppet towards him. Before Nagato's victim could reach him, however, a bald puppet with several holes in its head burst forth under Nagato's outstretched arm. The purpose of the holes quickly became apparent when spiked cord shot out, aiming to impale Nagato multiple times. He could easily survive the hit, but Nagato wasn't one to tolerate an image of weakness, especially now that he was a god. Shinra Tensei. The spiked cord bounced off the protective barrier before it burst out, launching the puppet and smashing it into dozens of pieces. A single twitch of Sasori's left thumb was enough to snap the whole puppet back together in a heartbeat. A heartbeat that Nagato used to snap off his hand at the wrist and reveal a rack of small missiles. The projectiles launched towards Sasori himself, only to be sliced in half midair by a red-haired puppet wielding two massive swords. The puppet landed on one of her sword as the bomb exploded in the air behind her. A massive tornado began to suck at Nagato, who looked in the direction of the suction to see three of the puppets standing in a small pyramid and generating the winds. Anchoring himself to the ground with chakra, Nagato fought the suction, and barely had time to react to the threads that burst out of the ground beneath him. Nagato jumped to prevent Kakuzu from grabbing a hold of him and ripping out his heart, and had to channel the Preta path to absorb the electrified water that came shooting towards him. Morphing the Ten Tails chakra into a long spear, Nagato impales Kakuzu, who coughed up blood around his threads as his second-to-last heart was destroyed. The inverted tornado grabbed hold of Nagato before he could recover from jumping, and he began to hurtle towards the three puppets. Nagato prepared the Ten Tails chakra to destroy the puppets, but they broke apart right as Nagato was about to reach them. The momentum kept carrying him forwards though, heading towards Kisame, who swung Samehada down sideways to maximize the surface area of his blow. Forced to use the black chakra defensively, Nagato stopped Kisame's strike dead in its tracks. Kisame merely smirked as the hilt of his blade extended, growing spikes and aiming to strike Nagato under his guard. The redhead leaned to one side, and gained nothing more than a cut on his stomach that healed almost immediately. Kisame jumped back before the dissolving chakra could strike around Samehada in a similar fashion. Before the Ten Tails chakra could retreat to its standard position as 10 orbs hovering behind him, two puppets with massive fists came in from either side to try and smash Nagato's face in. The punches were stopped by Nagato's outstretched palms, and two more hands that sprouted shot the puppets with a powerful blast of chakra. One of the puppets grew another hand before it died and grabbed hold of Nagato's two hands, while the other puppet had to be satisfied with restraining only one arm. Nagato's ringed eyes widened as he looked up to see a blanket of lava descending upon him. Growing two more hands, he blasted the lava with missiles until the blanket of fiery rock broke into a rain of hot globules. Freeing his hands from the puppets, Nagato began to drain the chakra from the mist that began to surround him as it started to eat away at his skin. As the mist faded, Nagato looked up to see the Mizukage looking back at him with her golden eyes, ringed by purple mascara. "You truly did a number on my previous body, and I had to jump into this one before I could make the modifications I wanted to. Now I'll be spending the next 3 years as a woman. Granted, you'll be spending eternity in a shallow grave. You'll need to do better if you want to kill a Sannin." "Kukuku," said the person who was most certainly not the Mizukage. "My mistake," said Nagato calmly. "I'll be sure to bring my best to the table this time." "Well, the best that you deserve anyway." Nagato rushed forward, swinging the black chakra down to bisect the now female Sannin. Orochimaru brought his hand to the side in a sweeping motion, and the Kusanagi blade levitated up from its previous position to intercept the chakra and knock it off course. Grabbing the hilt of the legendary sword, Orochimaru swung it across Nagato's body, and Akatsuki's former leader was forced to jump back or risk being bisected. Orochimaru would have shot his tongue out to grab Nagato and drag him back into the blow, or spat out a wave of 1,000 snakes to chase him down, but neither was possible at the moment with his new unaugmented body. So he settled for a ball of lava that Nagato quickly drained the chakra from. He was still forced to deal with a small boulder coming at him, and the force from the rock transferred to Nagato as he caught it to prevent actually being struck. Unfortunately, Kisame and Kakuzu took full advantage of the fact that Orochimaru had taken up both Nagato's hands and his more versatile abilities for a moment to drain chakra. Kisame held the Ten Tails chakra back with Samehada, while Kakuzu hardened his fist and literally launched a punch at Nagato. Nagato might not be able to launch blasts of gravity, or shoot chakra lasers, or suck out souls at the moment, and his Ten Tails chakra was holding back Orochimaru and Kisame's legendary swords at the moment, but he still had access to the most basic on ninja skills. Dodging, Nagato easily sidestepped the punch, dropped the rock that used to be a lava-style technique, and raised a hand towards Kakuzu. Bando Tensei. Kakuzu couldn't fight the force that began pulling him towards the self-made god, and he readied a water-style technique with his final heart from the 5 he had started out with. Before he could finish the technique though, Nagato had placed a hand on his chest. Still channeling the Deva path, Nagato couldn't rip out Kakuzu's soul. Instead, he shot a pitch black rod out of his sleeve to impale the second half of the zombie combo. Orochimaru and Kisame were blasted back as Nagato turned his attention to them, allowing Kakuzu's body to fall to the ground. The ex-Mist and Leaf Ninja skidded to a halt near Sasori, who had regrouped his puppets to assess the damage done to them by Nagato. Orochimaru began to sprint back towards Nagato, who simply scoffed at the Sanin's recklessness. Sasori's eyes widened at Orochimaru's actions, and Kisame was the first to find his voice as he ran after Orochimaru to provide backup. Damn it, Orochimaru! We need a plan! Rushing in will only get you killed. As Orochimaru drew nearer, reaching back with the sword of Kusanagi to strike off Nagato's head, Nagato maneuvered his black chakra to block the blow. Then the chakra faltered as a sharp pain arose from his back. Turning his head, he saw Kakuzu with his fist buried in the former Akatsuki leader's back, skin hardened and very much alive. Thanks for the extra heart, Orochimaru, said Kakuzu quietly, more to let Nagato know how he had been tricked than to actually thank the Sannin. Orochimaru's sword found its target, and separated Nagato's head from his body in a spray of blood. Think nothing of it. The old thing was failing me anyway, said the Sannin cheekily. Kisame and Sasori were both impressed that Orochimaru had a plan that worked so well, and furious that he hadn't told them. Any good ninja kept his guard up at all times, and the practice saved Orochimaru's life, though he still lost an arm. Looking at the god he had presumed dead for a second, Orochimaru found his neck connected to his head by the majority of the black chakra. A small amount had remained to slice off the Sanin's limb, an injury usually inconsequential, but far more severe without the ability to reattach limbs with the snakes kept in his body. Limb reattachment was apparently a skill Nagato had in spades, and he addressed them all as he had rejoined the body it had shortly left, a valiant effort that would have certainly killed any ninja of any skill level. Even my old self would have been done in. But I'm no longer a ninja. You face a god, and to even harm a god is something you cannot hope to accomplish in a million years, said Nagato as he glared down the 4 Akatsuki members. Then Nagato put the final nail in the coffin by flaring his chakra and killing intent. Even Orochimaru was paralyzed by the sheer chakra and malice he possessed. Nagato dashed in with a black blade in each arm to finish off Kakuzu and Orochimaru, when his black chakra was reallocated to stop the barrage of small birds that flew down on him and attempted to explode. They faded into the liquid black hole that surrounded Nagato protectively, but the human missile didn't. With gravity augmenting his speed, Naruto hit the black shield like a freight train, and it buckled under the force of a Sage Mode enhanced blow. Naruto finally broke through, though greatly slowed, with his red and black sage cloak billowing behind him. Sorry, but don't heroes always arrive fashionably late? Said Naruto while exploiting the element of surprise for all it was worth, hitting Nagato in the face while he was still stunned by the fact that someone had broken through his defenses. It was so surreal, Nagato forgot that he had fallbacks like the Deva path for a moment, and was sent flying for his momentary empty-headedness. Deidara flew down to just a few feet over the ground next to Naruto. None of you have personal beef with Jinchuriki, yeah? She asked, addressing the members of Akatsuki. I killed the Three-Tails Jinchuriki, but that was mostly because he was a tyrant and had me killing my comrades. That was a personal fight with Gaara, had nothing to do with him being a Jinchuriki, though I'm not a big fan of the 10-Tails Jinchuriki. Why the hell are you asking now? Said Kisame, annoyed that Deidara seemed to be ignoring the more imminent problem as Nagato slowly got to his feet. Orochimaru shrugged his shoulders, and Deidara was noticeably freaked out by the snake Sanin's raspy voice coming out of the young Mizukage's feminine mouth. I've never once killed a Jinchuriki. Except for my research that one time. My reason for killing Jinchuriki was that it was either orders or it meant a new puppet. I'm in the same boat as Kisame, said Sasori flippantly, more interested in doing some battlefield repairs on the 2 puppets that Nagato had destroyed during the fight. Kakuzu grunted non-committally. They make good money, but they're usually not worth the trouble. Deidara turned to Naruto and gave him a thumbs up as he faced down Nagato, who was looking at Naruto with a look of pure rage on his face. You dare strike me? I am the reincarnation of the Sage of the 6 Paths, created of all ninjutsu. I am a god! Shouted Nagato, obviously agitated by the fact that Naruto had inflicted an injury that created lasting pain. Even being decapitated only hurt for a split second, but the simple punch from Sage Mode was capable of treating Nagato like a normal human. And as a god, he couldn't let that stand. Sage of 6 Paths, huh? Asked Naruto, smirking at Nagato's unhinged behavior. Well, you might have the eyes, but you're missing 2 vital ingredients. A bit of confusion shone through Nagato's divine wrath, and Naruto decided to enlighten him. 1. The sage OD 6 paths was just that, a sage, and I'm not sensing a drop of natural chakra running through your body. 2. You aren't really the jinchuriki of the 10 tails. You're missing a bit. Impossible. Akatsuki captured every tailed beast. The statue began to revive, and I sealed it into myself. This chakra is proof, shouted Nagato as he gestured to the black orbs of chakra floating around him. Are you sure? Absolutely positive you found every jinchuriki? Because I have proof you didn't. Naruto decided to cut off any response by flaring the 9 tails chakra. The Akatsuki members were all shocked at the familiar chakra of a tailed beast, save Deidara, who had seen the transformation. I'm the real 9 tails jinchuriki, and since I'm both a sage and a jinchuriki, I'm as much a reincarnation of the sage of 6 paths as you are. Naruto claimed rubbed Nagato the wrong way, and he decided to show Naruto just how wrong he was. No! I am the sage of 6 paths. I am a god in human form. I am invincible. The black orbs of the 10 tails chakra coalesced around Nagato's hands as he clapped them together, and the sheer density of the chakra formed a small crater underneath Nagato. With a loud shout, he threw the black ball of chakra into the sky, and the effect was immediate. Even as it was still rising, the empowered Chibaku Tensei began to pull up massive chunks of the ground. Deidara's bird was pulled in slowly as it fought against the pull by flapping as hard as it could in a tug of war it was losing. The other members of Akatsuki didn't fare much better, being pulled into the epicenter of the new satellite that Nagato was creating. Remembering the strategy from before, Kakuzu, Orochimaru, Kisame, and Sasori all launched their strongest attacks at the black center of the technique, but this time the orb remained unharmed, protected and enhanced by the black chakra of the 10 tails. Naruto looked at Nagato before dashing towards the black orb in the sky by jumping between the pieces of debris. A similarly sized black sphere swirled to life in his hand, and the 9 tails chakra around his arm extended to thrust the miniature-tailed beast ball directly into the center of the Chibaku Tensei. Just because the tailed beast ball was smaller than the massive orbs created by tailed beasts didn't mean it had any less power though, and it probably had even more condensed into the size of a grapefruit. The resulting explosion of the tailed beast ball impacting its target was almost as large as the finished moon would have been. Just as before, the boulders lifted up by the Sage of 6 Paths technique began to fall as the chakra orb in its center was destroyed by the raw power of the strongest tailed beast. Nagato was less than pleased with this, and shot a blast of pure chakra at the other jinchuriki while his speed was limited to the rate of gravity. Before the searing beam of energy could hit him, Naruto was pushed out of the way by a white-clad puppet. The blast was enough to vaporize the legendary puppet, and Sasori was glad he was physically incapable of crying at the irreparable damage to such an artifact of his craft. Naruto landed lightly on his feet as the black chakra reformed from the particles in the air around Nagato. Naruto turned when he was addressed by Kakuzu, who looked dead on his feet and was breathing heavily. That black chakra destroys everything but natural chakra, and he can use other abilities like those lasers, but he can only use one at a time. If he touches you, he can tear out your soul, and he can blast you away with some kind of powerful force. He summoned some strange beasts earlier, but he hasn't in a while, and he can absorb chakra, even natural chakra, with his bare hands. Seeing Naruto's questioning look, Kakuzu sighed. I'm running on one very old, nearly dead heart. I'm afraid I won't be of much help. Alright. Thanks for the intel, but I got this, so try not to die, said Naruto, turning his golden gaze to Nagato. Feeling a powerful presence in his mind rearing up, Naruto closed his eyes and retreated to his mind for a moment. Time passed slowly here, and he could subdue the 9 tails if it was escaping before Nagato even wondered why his opponent was closing his eyes. What do you want, Fox? I have a name, you know, replied the 9 tails indignantly from behind its cage. Not that I'd ever tell you. Growling as if he was still debating giving Naruto the information, the mightiest tailed beast continued. If you can manage to free my brethren and unite me with the rest of my chakra, I'll willingly cooperate with you for long enough to utterly crush that fake sage of 6 paths. Naruto raised an eyebrow in curiosity. It wasn't often that the 9 tails offered anything more than a quick death, and it was even stranger that he would be willing to give Naruto the time of day, let alone help him in a fight. How would I go about freeing the other tailed beasts? I'm not exactly the best at seals. The 9 tails scoffed at Naruto's lack of knowledge. I should have known you humans would be next to useless. The best way would be to release me and let me do it, but if you insist on struggling your way through this, you should be able to pull tailed beast chakra out of him like you stole mine before. Once out, we should return to the forms the Sage of 6 Paths gave us when we were born. Naruto was still suspicious of the Nine Tails, but there was no real risk to listening to the tailed beast. Opening his eyes in the real world, Naruto rushed the former leader of Akatsuki. The black chakra of the 10 tails bent under the force of the sage's blows, but without the added force and the element of surprise the shield held. Nagato raised a hand and lowered his guard to retaliate. Naruto tried to exploit the opening but was shocked when the force sent him flying despite the power of Sage Mode and the Nine Tails Chakra Mode combined. Naruto recovered though, and nodded to Deidara. She nodded back before tossing him a beautifully crafted clay toad and sending a wave of small locusts flying and jumping and crawling towards Nagato while Naruto sprinted back in. Nagato ran through a set of seals and countered the attack with a horde of actual locusts, the only differences being the small Rinnegan and piercings in the insects. Nagato got the 10 tails chakra up just in time to deflect the blow from Naruto, though he punched through the barrier with his superior strength and speed. The hordes of locusts began to clash, with the real ones eating the clay, and the clay ones blowing up the flesh and blood insects. The summoned bugs also had an effect incredibly similar to the iron sand that Sasori used so much, clogging up the workings of Chikamatsu's collection. Sasori rushed in, protecting himself from a similar fate by incinerating everything with the flamethrowers mounted in his palms to rescue his puppets. Deidara's force was smaller, but her army of bugs was bolstered by new forces as quickly as she could make them, and each one caused more damage with its explosion. Sneaking a bird into the mix, Deidara smirked. Naruto, meanwhile, was still trying to even lay a hand on Nagato. The redhead could see the extensions of natural chakra that Naruto tried to hit him with, and the speed boost from the Nine Tails chakra was only usable in straight lines for quick bursts. It could likely be used more effectively in close quarters combat, but Naruto hadn't used the chakra all that much, and as such hadn't really had a chance to practice and experiment. His inexperience was Nagato's gain, and the Rinnegan-bearing Jinchuriki counterattacked by smashing Naruto across the face with the black chakra of the 10 tails. The blows sent him into the ground in a cloud of dust and small rocks. Nagato raised his hand to absorb the chakra form the Jinchuriki and complete the 10 tails within him, but was forced to wheel around and drain the chakra of the clay bird that came diving down. Drained of the chakra that allowed it to move and explode, the eagle fell to the ground and shattered. Naruto used the time to recover though, and used his speed to smash Nagato across the face and send him flying. Nagato halted his flight path by stabbing the ground with a black rod and pulling himself down. Glaring at Naruto, he almost missed the incoming attack. Water style, shark geyser. The black chakra absorbed the eruption of water from below as Nagato jumped up to stand on a floating disc of it, and Kisame's strike with Samehada was stopped with a blast of gravity that sent the shark flying. Kisame would have lost his weapon from the power of the blast, but Samehada refused to be separated from its master and dug spikes from the hilt into Kisame's hand. Kisame grinned with his sharpened teeth as he landed on top of Samehada's hilt after digging it into the ground to stop his momentum. Naruto noticed what Kisame had done and took advantage of it. With the black chakra still holding back the seemingly limitless amount of water gushing forth from the ground and Nagato unable to absorb chakra while using his force manipulation abilities, there was no defense, and Naruto rushed in a golden blur and slammed his palm into Nagato's chest. The small toad in his hand that he had infused with Sage Mode chakra croaked once, and then exploded as Naruto grabbed hold of Nagato to keep him in place. The force of the explosion was massive, and even Naruto struggled to remain standing through the blast. The remaining locusts were killed by the heat from the explosion, and Kisame was glad he had been launched to a safe distance by Nagato's attack. The durability granted by virtue of being the 10 tails Jinchuriki kept Nagato alive, but his entire body was racked in pain as he was sent flying away. Nagato looked up groggily, and was snapped back to full alert by what he saw. Stretching the distance between him and Naruto was a massive cord of red and black chakra. Realizing that the chakra was his, Nagato's eyes widened and he grabbed a hold of the chakra and tried to pull it back into himself. Naruto had created extra hands with the 9 tails chakra to help extract the ridiculous amount of chakra, and Nagato returned the favor by sprouting 4 more arms and trying to pull it back in. Kisame, now! Nagato looked up at Naruto's shout, and saw Kisame descending with Samehada raised above his head, ready to sever Nagato's connection to the chakra. Nagato willed the black chakra orbs around him to intercept the swordsman, but found them gone, absorbed into the chakra being stolen. Samehada cut through the chakra cord near Nagato's hands, severing 2 of them, and Naruto pulled the chakra away with one last great heave. The chakra split into 8 globules that landed heavily on the ground, and Naruto's 9 tails chakra reacted to grab a hold of one of the bigger chunks of chakra, which it absorbed fervently. Nagato pulled the remaining bit of chakra he had managed to keep a hold of back into his body, and a single red tail formed from the base of his back as black circles formed around his eyes. Nagato's vibrant red hair faded a bit to a duller, dead-looking color. Akatsuki's former leader sagged a bit as the energy of the 10 tails faded from him. His Rinnegan looked at Naruto, now without the tomo around the rings. The golden jinchuriki stood resolute, unharmed by his proximity to the blast that had nearly killed Nagato even with the 10 tails chakra. The whisker marks on Naruto's cheeks had become large bars, and the golden energy spiked his hair almost straight up, creating 2 horn-like protrusions. His high-collared sage's cloak had become enveloped in the golden aura as well, with 9 tomo and a spiral added to the back. Black markings ran across his gold skin, completing the image. Nagato gasped at the sight. How? I have the Rinnegan. I was supposed to be the reincarnation of the Sage of Six Paths. How are you closer to him than I am? I'm not closer to the Sage of Six Paths, said Naruto, shaking his head. I'm me. And you're you. And your misguided attempts at peace have killed hundreds, including my comrades. And for that, I won't forgive you. A tailed beast ball swirled to life in Naruto's palm. Nagato closed his eyes as the attack neared him. His plan for peace had failed, been foiled by the last hurdle in his path. He had built a bridge to peace, and then sought to destroy it to prevent a return to the world that had been. And the supports of that bridge had fallen out from under him. As his body exploded in a sphere of black chakra, Nagato wondered what he could have done differently to secure the future he, Konan, and Yahiko had dreamed about as children. Once the blast subsided, Naruto's golden aura began to slowly fade, before leaving him entirely in a quick burst. Gasping at the sudden loss of power, Naruto fell to his knees and closed his eyes. Opening them in his mind, Naruto came face to face with the grinning fox, who was now over twice as large as before. What did you just do? The fox smiled at Naruto sadistically. I merely took back what was mine, and it feels so good to be complete again. I'd use my full might to escape and eat you whole, but you kept your end of the bargain, so I guess I owe you that. Now get out of my sight. With that, the 9 tails roared menacingly, and the force propelled Naruto out of his own mindscape. Naruto opened his eyes to see Deidara looking at him worriedly, with an arm slung over his shoulder. He grinned sheepishly and struggled to stand, succeeding with a bit of help from his partner. Sorry to worry you, he said. No problem, yeah? And good job. You just saved, probably the entire world, said Deidara, looking around at the destruction caused by the massive battle. What had once been 3 mountains shaped like howling wolves that towered above the land of iron was now a ruined crater that was actually lower than the surrounding land. Wish there were more rewards to saving the world than death and destruction, said Naruto glumly as he looked around at the chaos and devastation caused by the man he had followed towards peace for years. Who says that there isn't, yeah? Asked Deidara, before grabbing Naruto's shoulders and kissing him. It was a strange experience, and Naruto didn't respond for a moment from the sheer shock of what was happening. Before he had time to respond though, Deidara pulled away and coughed awkwardly. Good job there, but what's with the leftover chakra? Asked Kisame as he strode up, Samahata strapped across his back. He gestured over his shoulder to the blob of chakra that was slowly taking form. It was unclear what it was going to be at the moment, but the indicated that it would be massive. That's a tailed beast, explained Naruto, half pissed at Kisame for interrupting and half glad for the excuse to focus on something else for a short time. They'll reform quickly, so it might be best if we weren't here when they do. Very well then, said Sasori as he walked up, supporting a tired Kakuzu that was looking older by the second. Though I should probably give Kakuzu a new heart soon. I think I have a spare. Yes, it was a pretty bad heart near the end, lamented Orochimaru. Though this body was preferable to it. But this body might as well be weaker than the old one without any of the augmentations. Oh well, Kabuto and I will whip this body into shape soon enough. So, what do we do now? Asked Naruto. None of them had any clue, but they imagined they would think of something. Chapter 27. So are you awake yet? I know you're not dead, said Kisame, Samahata slung over his back, more tired than he had ever been. The young Uchiha leaning up against a tree opened his black eyes sluggishly. I'm not entirely sure why I'm not. Didn't you say you wanted to avenge your partner? I was the one who killed Itachi. Kisame's shoulders shook as he chuckled. Itachi was a man of secrets, but I was around him often enough to learn a few. Let me share 2 of them with you. 1. Itachi was dying. Not many could notice it, but I saw the blood and heard the coughs when he thought no one was around. The information shocked Sasuke, but the lack of chakra beyond maintaining life prevented him from moving. There's no way Itachi was, began Sasuke, but then he thought back to the final moments of his fight with Itachi. He had been a little too distracted to notice properly at the time, but the Susanoo had been having some adverse effect on Itachi. Sasuke had written it off as some kind of side effect of the Sharingan's ultimate technique, but now that he thought about it, he had never coughed up blood due to using the Susanoo. Seeing the look of understanding dawn on Sasuke's face, Kisame continued. The second thing I knew about Itachi is that there was no way he could lose against you then if it came down to raw skill and power. Itachi let you win that fight, God knows why. And I'll pay you back blow for blow, but Itachi's blood isn't on your hands. It's on his own, so I'll let you live this time, don't waste it. We'll meet again. With that, Kisame walked away, leaving Sasuke to struggle to his feet. The last Uchiha managed to stand upright, and headed towards the site where the Three Wolves Mountains had been. As he staggered towards the site, it became apparent that that land had gone from high mountains to a large crater in the ground. Sasuke's half-closed eyes fought off exhaustion to widen at the sight of 8 massive clumps of chakra slowly taking shape into various beasts. Akatsuki was long gone, and Sasuke began to limp over to the wreckage to look for any survivors of whatever had happened here. Ha! Found it! Sasuke whirled around at the shout, wincing at the pain and realizing that he was incapable of producing enough fire to light a candle in his current state. The Uchiha grimaced as he pulled a kunai out of his leg pouch, hoping surprise would be enough to give him an easy victory. Unfortunately, Suigetsu wasn't a complete idiot, and reacted to the familiar sound of a drawn kunai as any half-decent academy student would, with violence. Let's test this baby out, shouted Suigetsu as his new sword was wreathed in a blue aura. The blade was encased in a massive blade of pure chakra that swung horizontally at Sasuke, who barely managed to duck under the swing, though it was more like a controlled collapse. The legendary sword sliced through the rocks behind Sasuke with worrying ease, and the Uchiha was scared for a moment that he had survived Kisame only to be killed by some random swordsman. Note to self, that uses a lot of chakra, mumbled Suigetsu as he staggered around like the town drunk before collapsing across from Sasuke. Who are you anyway? Someone who's lucky to have survived this. Who are you, and what are you doing here? Countered Sasuke, hoping that his chakra would recover faster than his opponents. Suigetsu Hozuki, future leader of the 7 ninja swordsmen of the Hidden Mist. I came back to get this sword though. I don't exactly know how to use it all that well, the white-haired teen admitted sheepishly. Whatever, I don't have time to waste here, there are tailed beasts. Hold on a second, do you know what happened here? Asked Sasuke as Suigetsu got up to his feet unsteadily and started to walk away. From what Master Oro I mean Mistress Orochimaru, corrected Suigetsu, giggling to himself at some jokes Sasuke didn't get. Anyway, Orochimaru just said Akatsuki had a falling out with their leader. This is what's left when 10S rankers go at it full force. And it won't be getting any prettier once those beasts come to their senses. Almost as if Suigetsu's words were the cue it had been waiting for, the nearest lump of malevolent chakra swung out an elongated chunk of what Sasuke imagined would become a tail eventually. The 2 ninja easily dodged the haphazard swipe even in their depleted state. Alright, this is getting dangerous, said a pale Suigetsu. I don't know who you are, I don't care who you are. I'm getting out while the getting's good. Wait a second, shouted Sasuke. Suigetsu turned around, obviously annoyed at being held up again. You said you work for Orochimaru. What is Akatsuki doing now? I'd imagine they're eating dinner, replies Suigetsu sarcastically before dropping his sharpened smile. Seriously though, you're thinking too highly of me. All I've heard is we're going somewhere wet, whatever that means. Personally, I look forward to a little moisture, and not getting killed by a half-formed slug. See ya. With that, Suigetsu placed a large sword on his back and took off. Sasuke grimaced as he began the long limp back to the Hidden Leaf Village. The ninja world had been shaken to its very core by the death of the 5 Kage, and the desolation of the Land of Iron. The place had become synonymous with suicide, as venturing there risked angering the 8 demons that had taken up residence in the land. Thanks to the tailed beasts, climates ranged from active volcanoes to deep forests to vast deserts where once there had only been harsh snow and fierce winds. The remaining villages were dealt another blow when only months later, the village hidden in the rain fell, not to any of the other villages seeking to fill the power vacuum as was expected, but a group of 6 powerful S-ranked ninjas in black and red cloaks. Oddly enough though, Akatsuki didn't stop there. The former terrorist group continued to push their own agenda by sweeping across the land and decimating the armies of the other villages that were preparing for war. Leaderless, there was little resistance from the major villages, who were glad that a long and painful war had been averted, even if half the world was under the control of Akatsuki. But Akatsuki did not stop there. "Sir, you'll never guess who it is," said the ninja as he burst into Ao's office. The man left to guard the Hidden Mist village was serving as interim Mizukage, a post he wished every day he didn't have, though he was grateful to Akatsuki on some level for either destroying the armies of the more minor villages or scaring them back into the woodworks. It was nothing compared to his rage over the death of the former Mizukage. Mei Terumi had led the rebellion for years against the oppression of Gaara, and by the end of those hard years she had been like a mother to most of the ninja that followed her. Not being able to protect her and Chojuro would haunt him to the grave. "This had better not be some kind of game," shouted Ao, looking up from the mountain of paperwork with barely contained anger over his subordinate's casual tone. The ninja backpedaled both mentally and physically at his leader's tone. "It's Lord Kisame. He's requested an audience and is outside now." Ao was even more frustrated at Kisame's title being used when he was a member of Akatsuki. Then again, the Hidden Mist had few allies in the world, and losing their jinchuriki, a tyrant and a traitor, hadn't hit them nearly as hard as the other villages. Kisame was the leader of one of the first and most successful attempts on the Mizukage's life, making him some kind of celebrity among the former rebellion. Ao had been one of the many admirers that the monster of the Hidden Mist had, but that admiration had forever been destroyed by his part in the Mizukage's death. Ao looked out his office's windows to see that the blue-skinned swordsman was indeed standing outside the building, clad in the black and red cloak of Akatsuki and smiling with the sharpened teeth of a member of the 7 ninja swordsmen. By the time Ao had stormed down to the entrance of the building, a small crowd had gathered around Kisame, full of excitable young people who had heard of his exploits and respectful elderly who remembered watching him grow up. Ao shocked them all out of the past with his harsh tone. "What are you doing here, Akatsuki?" "Business, I'm afraid, though I may treat myself to some crabs later." "Local delicacy, you know," said Kisame as his grin grew a bit more before fading as he grew serious. "Really though, I just need a little promise from the Hidden Mist. You guys don't go to war, ever, and Akatsuki doesn't end any attempts to go to war. Simple, huh? Just think of Akatsuki as the army that stops armies." The deal seemed good to the older folks in the crowd. Akatsuki had demonstrated what they could do, and those who had lived through wars had no wish to repeat it. The younger members of the crowd were too caught up in actually seeing a living legend right in front of them to grasp the changing of the world order. Ao's skepticism and hate made him the only one to object. A hidden village's strength is based off of its performance in war. You wish to take that away and expect us to give all our power to the Akatsuki? Kisame chuckled. Not at all. Every other village is being offered the same thing. You should feel lucky I volunteered to come. We could have sent Kakuzu. This was followed by another laugh, which drew in the crowd, despite them not really knowing what they were laughing at. This will bring peace. My job is to get you to agree to that, or make sure nobody is left to disagree. This is still my home though, so I'm trying to be lenient here, but there is a line. Don't cross it for your own pride. Ao's scowl deepened. We will never bow down to traitors like you, who allies himself with those who killed the Mizukage. Kisame had the gall to throw back his head in laughter. I thought the whole goal of your movement for years was to kill the Mizukage. Don't hate me just because I did what you couldn't. Yugura was a tyrant, but Mei Terumi was a fantastic leader, killed before her time by Akatsuki. Ao pulled out a scroll with 7 seals, though all but 2 were empty. I'll die before I surrender the future to scum like you. Kisame's laughter stopped abruptly. Does anyone else agree with him? Any supporters were silenced by Samahata breaking the ground as Kisame hefted it off his back. Noticing the lack of supporters, Kisame grunted in satisfaction. But you'd all be fine if things stayed the same, wouldn't you? How about this then? If you can beat me, Ao, Akatsuki will back off for good. The Hidden Mist will be beyond our influence. If I win, the village falls into line peacefully and embraces the way the world will be. Deal? There was a puff of smoke, and Ao was wielding a long needle with a length of wire thread at the base. Kisame smirked at the sight. To beat a legendary blade you need to use a legendary blade, eh? Sorry, but Kushimaru was never able to beat me. Ao silently made a hand seal, and a deep mist began to settle over the area. And now you want to beat me at silent killing? I'm no Zabuza, but you just keep digging your grave deeper. Kisame trailed off slowly as he faded into silence and began to reach out with his other senses to find Ao and kill him, knowing that Ao would be doing the same. Unfortunately, their chosen field of battle was right next to the village proper, and the ambient noise was distracting. Still, Kisame was alert enough to lean his head to the side as the Nuibari whisked by. A slight gash appeared on his arm as the sword shot right back almost immediately from behind. Kisame listened even more, and began to dodge an alarming number of strikes, considering that Ao was only one person throwing this sword. Ao, meanwhile, was patting himself on the back for creating so many water clones to pass the sword between. He knew he had no hope against Kisame in a fair fight, which was why he hadn't used the blast sword Shibuki. A sword that used chakra was useless against Samahada. Kisame's attempts at hiding in the mist were commendable, but ultimately useless to the stolen Byakugan that resided under his eye patch. Kisame growled to himself at how rusty he had become with the signature technique of the 7 ninja swordsmen, and his home village even. He hadn't used it against a serious opponent since he had gotten Samahada. Looking down at his sword with a brilliant idea, Kisame grinned and rose his sword into the air. Ao almost gasped and gave away his position as the hidden mist technique began to drain his chakra incredibly quickly compared to usual as the mist began to swirl. His Byakugan saw the chakra flow out of the mist into Samahada, and he grunted in frustration as he ended the technique. Kisame grinned as Ao came into view. Now I remember why I never got as good as Zabuza at silent killing. I never needed to. Clever use of the clones, by the way. Longsword ninja art, razor ensnarement, shouted Ao as he pulled suddenly on the wire attached to his sword. Kisame became aware of the razor-sharp, almost invisible wire that had been trailing the sword all this time, and was now all around him. A sharper sword like the Thunder Sword's Kiba or the Sever Sword Kubokiribocho would have been able to cut through the thread of the Nobari, but Samahada was probably the sword least aimed at actually cutting through things. Kisame knew that the razor wire would slice through him easily. He had seen Kushimaru stitch together enough necklaces, as he had called them, to know that Nobari treated the human body like an arts and crafts project. Thinking quickly, Kisame jammed Samahada point first into the ground and holding himself up with a one-handed handstand that kept him above the threads as they dug into Samahada. The shark sword held up admirably, but it was now completely trapped. Kisame lowered himself on the other side of the threads and sprinted towards one of Ao's water clones. He grabbed the one-eyed clone before it could react. 1/10 of Ao's speed wasn't nearly enough to keep up with Kisame. The Akatsuki member slammed the clone into the ground where he exploded in a burst of water, which Kisame reformed into his own water clone with a simple seal. Kisame could have ended the fight even without Samahada in a heartbeat, but his pride as a swordsman was on the line, something Ao had likely been counting on when he brought out Nuibari. The clone raced back to try and free Samahada as Kisame covered it. His unarmed combat wasn't fantastic, and using a water technique was a bad idea when he was trying to keep collateral damage to a minimum, but his taijutsu was enough to fend off the water clones until the clone managed to weasel Samahada free, aided by the sword itself. Grabbing his sword, Kisame sliced the remaining clones in half with one fell swing. He then turned his attention to the real Ao, who had been the only one able to dodge his attack. Ao then took advantage of Kisame's follow-through to dash forward and strike out. Gentle blade. Chakra raced down the needle and Kisame just smirked as he spun his hungry blade around to intercept. Instead of eating the chakra right up like it usually did, Samahada began to writhe in pain when the smaller blade stabbed it. Kisame jumped back, suddenly wary of the needle. The blade was sharp, but it shouldn't have been able to pierce Samahada's scales. "What the hell did you do?" asked Kisame. Ao couldn't hold back a smirk. "I may not be a Hyuga, but the concept of the gentle fist is simple enough. Use the Byakugan to target the chakra system. And every living thing has a chakra system, even living swords." Kisame began to laugh maniacally at that, using Samahada as a crutch to keep himself upright. "What's so funny?" demanded Ao. "You've been waiting for me to eat your chakra or turn the battlefield into an ocean, and you've prepared all these countermeasures. But you forgot the basics. Water prison." Ao's eye widened at the technique's name, since it required the user to be right next to the target. Then he felt the water flowing over him, trapping him in an orb. Turning around, Ao saw what Kisame had meant. Smiling back at him, hands converted to the water for the technique, was Kisame's water clone. Kisame walked up to his captive and raised Samahada aloft. "Game, set, match. This is Akatsuki territory now." Samahada came down, and the water prison was dyed red by the time it hit the ground. "I must say, your security is shockingly lacking." Not nearly as tight as when I killed the 8 tails jinchuriki, said Orochimaru as he rose up out of the floor. But where are my manners? I'm Orochimaru of the legendary Sannin, here to secure your village's future as a core member of Akatsuki. Sure whirled around at the sound, turning away from the paperwork that he had to deal with as the new Raikage after the deaths of both A and B. And how would Akatsuki secure our village's future? He asked, voice laced with sarcasm and loathing. By not finishing the job you started? You've already doomed our village, harsh words. Chastised Orochimaru. But true. We did kill the Raikage, though that was under our old leader. Akatsuki has new management. All we'll do now is destroy any armies that are mobilized. You won't even have to stop taking missions. Protection from every other army as long as you don't raise your own. Akatsuki will enforce peace. I'm interested to see where this goes, aren't you? Sure responded with a flurry of hand seals. Lightning illusion, flash of lightning pillar. A bright light emanated from his body, blinding Orochimaru. Sure acted quickly, drawing a kunai and extending its reach with lightning chakra and chopping off Orochimaru's head. Sure held his breath for a brief moment until the body didn't turn into a log or collapse into mud before smiling at the success of the element of surprise. Or not. Perhaps your successor will be more understanding. Sure whirled around to see the body of the Sannin jerkily getting up, a long snake extended out of its neck. Following the serpent along, Sure saw it attached to Orochimaru's head, which was wearing a victorious smirk and joining the body once more. Really now, don't look so surprised. Did you think I could be on the same team as the best medic in the world, strive for immortality, create hundreds of forbidden techniques, and be done in by a kunai and the element of surprise? Sure brought his hands together in another seal, but Orochimaru's hand shot out like a snake and grabbed him by the fingers, holding him in the seal. That's the other thing. We'll be around for about forever, said Orochimaru after faking a moment to think about it. One last chance to agree before this office explodes. Sure grimaced once before spitting in Orochimaru's face. The hidden cloud will never follow Akatsuki. Shame you won't live to see how wrong you are. Lava style, volcanic creation. Forming one-handed seals and slamming his palm on the ground, Orochimaru quickly ejected another body from his mouth out of the window as the ground beneath the office fractured, letting in a red light from below. Before Sure could even move, the lava burst upwards, immolating everything inside the mountain. It would have likely continued upwards, but the weaker glass structure of the Raikage's office let the lava pour out down the side of the mountain. Orochimaru looked onward at his handiwork, interested to see whether the artificial volcano would last long and see whether the next Raikage would be more accepting of Akatsuki's terms. Kakuzu had once been a man of subtlety. After all, flat-out overpowering the first Hokage would have been impossible, but Kakuzu's wit and planning had impressed the man enough to get his village a tailed beast. After that fight, though, things had changed. Leaving the village by blowing up the jail cell and ripping out the hearts of the village leaders could hardly be called finesse. But this new method suited Kakuzu just fine, and he wasn't about to change now. Restocked on hearts from Sasori's army that allowed him to fight, unlike Orochimaru's old heart that was barely enough to keep him alive, Kakuzu once more used his favorite earth-style technique. The earth spear made his hand so hard that he hardly felt the gates of the village hidden in the rocks as he punched them down with nothing but his fist. Walking directly towards the Tsuchikage's office in the middle of the day in full Akatsuki regalia after literally punching down their door was about as far from subtle as you could get. He attracted a lot of attention from the ninja that the hidden rock had been preparing for war. The boulders came down on him like rain, but they did little to slow him down as they broke against his skin. The dominant chakra nature was earth, but several fire and even an odd water technique were thrown at him. By the time he reached the office of the Tsuchikage, his mask and cloak were in tatters, but the attacks had mostly stopped as the ninja had slowly realized they were just wasting chakra. Kakuzu was greeted by the Tsuchikage's son, Kitsuchi, a jonin worth over 50 million on the black market, dead or alive, and proficient in large-scale earth-style techniques. The information jumped to Kakuzu through force of habit as Kitsuchi approached him. "Give me one good reason not to leave you 6 feet under," threatened Kitsuchi. "You can disband your army, or I can disband it for you. Akatsuki will be the only peacekeepers in the world now," said Kakuzu simply, ignoring the threat. Seeing Kitsuchi begin the seals for a technique, he continued, "I wouldn't if I were you. Earth-style, sandwich." The rock ninja scurried to get out of the way as 2 massive hemispheres rose out of the ground and flew towards Kakuzu. 2 masks rose out of his back, one firing off a concentrated bolt of lightning while the other shot razor blades of wind to slice and dice the incoming walls of rock before they could reach him. Kitsuchi seemed undeterred though. The proud ninja of the hidden rock village will never kneel to Akatsuki. I'm not sure you have a choice, said Kakuzu menacingly from behind his mask. His right hand turned a darker shade as it became as hard as diamond and segmented from his body halfway up his forearm. As the open hand flew through the air, Kitsuchi flew through hand seals. Earth-style, rock shelter. The reason water-style techniques were usually weak to earth-style ones was their inability to pierce through the numerous defensive techniques the style was famed for. The rock shelter was one of the most basic, yet remained the most usable as the strength of the barrier increased with the skill of the user, making a rock shelter used by a master like Kitsuchi almost impregnable. Kakuzu's earth spear was a step above that though. It was a high-level earth-style technique used by a heart with a strong earth affinity by a ninja with over 100 years of experience. Kakuzu's hardened fist punched through the wall Kitsuchi raised with little effort, though the barrier did slow down the attack enough for Kitsuchi to dodge it. Earth Dragon Bullet. An earthen dragon head rose out of the rocks in front of Kitsuchi and fired of several boulders that broke upon impact with the Akatsuki member's rock-hard skin, though the force did make Kakuzu grunt in exertion. His hand shot back and stitched itself back to the rest of his body, and Kakuzu slammed his hands together in a single hand seal designed to focus chakra. Kitsuchi wasn't waiting to see what technique was though, raising another rock shelter, this time leaving a slit to see Kakuzu through. Kitsuchi was surprised however that Kakuzu was simply standing there, glaring at him. It didn't make sense until he felt the sharp pain in the back of his knee. Quickly looking over his shoulder to find the source, Kitsuchi saw a creature made of black threads and a white mask close its mouth and soar over him. Looking back to Kakuzu, Kitsuchi's eyes widened to see the ex-waterfall ninja not 2 feet in front of him. Kakuzu picked Kitsuchi up by the throat before the rock ninja could react and raised his other hand menacingly as the thread creature re-entered his back. I'd love to continue our fight, but I'm a bit pressed for time at the moment, so kneel already. Kakuzu delivered a powerful, rock-hard chop to Kitsuchi's kneecap, eliciting a suppressed yell of pain as the bone shattered. Kakuzu dropped Kitsuchi on the ground, where his broken legs refused to hold him up any longer, and he fell to his hands and knees, gasping in pain. Kakuzu disregarded him and turned to face the horrified ninja of the rock village. You can kneel willingly, or I can break more of you. Which will it be? There were a few more broken legs in the village by the time Kakuzu left, but the nation fell in line quickly. Sasori had not been to the village of his birth in years. Just because he had never been there though didn't mean he didn't have an expansive network running through the entire village. In fact, more attention had been focused on the hidden sand village at any given time than anywhere else. One simple seal, and half the sand's population would follow him unquestioningly, which is why it came as little surprise that the gates were already open for him. The 2 guards turned on each other in a heartbeat. The remaining one stood ramrod straight, saluting Sasori and covered in the blood of his former friend. Sasori smirked within his Hiriko puppet at the success of his coup. The hunched-over armored puppet slowly made its way through the village towards the Kazekage's home. The Akatsuki member didn't go unnoticed by the sand ninja in the village though. Those who weren't secretly his subordinates paused in their fights with their former colleagues to try and strike him, who they could attack without hesitation, but most were stopped by his loyal spies. The few that got through every now and then were effortlessly slapped aside by the large metal tail that slid out from under his Akatsuki cloak, leaving them groaning on the ground as the deadly poison seeped through their veins. Sasori worked his way up the Kazekage mansion, breaking down the door to the roof. Before him were several bodies of his subordinates in pools of their own blood, with one lone man standing before in the middle, clearly exhausted. The eye knot covered up widened as Baki saw the signature red clouds of Akatsuki. What is this, Akatsuki? What have you done? Sasori chuckled, though it was closer to a giggle before Hiriko altered it. This is the result of years of planning. Spies and undercover subordinates, mind seals and meticulous planning. I've been planning my revenge for a long time, but I never thought I would use it for others, let alone in the name of peace, said Sasori as 2 more of his sand ninja landed on the roof on either side of him. Wind flared around Baki's hands once more. Who are you? Why would you want revenge on this village? And what's this talk of peace? Simple really. All nations united under Akatsuki. No more wars since there will be only one side. It has the future taken into account too. Half of us are practically immortal. As for why I had all this planned out, stand down, explained Sasori calmly, addressing his 2 subordinates with the last words. Yes, Lord Sasori. The 2 responded in tandem as they took a knee. Baki gasped in shock at the name of the legendary puppeteer. Sasori ignored them and faced the man who had been leading his village since the disastrous summit of the 5 Kage. So I hope that explains why I've been planning this for years. Now on to my current proposition. Akatsuki simply wants to warn you that any attempts to raise an army will be met with a blow that makes this look like child's play. Droned Sasori as he slowly approached a wary Baki. Order your forces to stand down, and all of mine will do the same, or I can kill you and give the order myself. Make your choice quickly. I hate to be kept waiting. Sasori emphasized his point by bringing up his poisoned tail, holding it next to his face, prepared to strike. Baki looked around at the village from the roof of the Kazekage's mansion, situated to have an unparalleled view of the village. He could hear the distant screams of ninja fighting to the death, see the smoke curling up into the sky from the beginnings of fires. Gritting his teeth, Baki turned back to Sasori. Gods forgive me. Stand down, he shouted out, his voice piercing through the night sky. Good choice, said Sasori as he turned around to leave. We'll be in touch. Jiraiya walked up to the black-clad blonde, eyes narrowed. What happened in the land of iron? He asked, wasting no time. We discovered why Akatsuki was capturing the tailed beasts. Nagato fused them into the 10 tails. Naruto heard Jiraiya's sharp intake of breath, and held up his hand to stem the flow of questions. Then he sealed the 10 tails into himself. His plan was to kill all the Kage with Akatsuki, then kill Akatsuki and rule the world as some kind of god. Akatsuki fought him, and we won. Finished Naruto simply. And now? Asked Jiraiya skeptically. I hear word of Akatsuki taking over villages by force. As far as I can tell, our plan is the same as Nagato's. For better or worse, I'm not a god, said Naruto simply with a shrug. If you have a better plan, I'm all ears. The difference between us and Nagato is that we can be stopped by each other if need be. Other than that, I'm not even sure if there is a difference. An awkward silence fell over the two sages as Jiraiya struggled to come to terms with what had happened. So, I suppose you expect the Hidden Leaf to do the same. I've heard what happened in the Hidden Sand. Can we expect the same? Naruto shook his head solemnly. I called you here to talk in hopes of avoiding that. Sasori was a little heavy-handed, but if people are going to respect Akatsuki's terms, they do need to be shown that we have the strength to back up our words. Now that Sasori has done that, we can reach a more peaceful accord. Jiraiya nodded sagely, also hoping to avoid having Akatsuki attack the Hidden Leaf. One member could be defeated, but the damage would be considerable. 2 members, and the Hidden Leaf would lose. They simply didn't have as many strong ninja as they did even a year ago, and Jiraiya could only do so much by himself. I've heard rumors, but what are your terms? I want to hear them from you. The hidden villages cease all military actions. If a village raises an army, Akatsuki deals with it. Regular missions can continue with no interference. Explained Naruto simply, before a sad grin spread across his face. We create 2 sides, and our side has no one else. As long as we win, the cycle of war and hate stops moving forward. If we lose, the cycle breaks apart. Jiraiya was shocked that Naruto was prepared to go that far for the goal of peace, but one thing still bothered him. And are the other members of Akatsuki aware of this plan? Naruto smirked knowingly. Do they need to be? Once this plan is in motion, those are the only 2 outcomes. Peace brought about by Akatsuki, or peace brought about by their downfall. So this is your plan? It's good, but I'm not sure if I'm willing to entrust the future to a group of murdering criminals, said Jiraiya as he began to absorb natural chakra. Naruto turned around slowly, eyes closed. Then feel free to test my resolve. Deidara knows the plan. I'm not needed. If my death will stop the cycle for the generation needed for Akatsuki to be the only enemy the world knows, then so be it. I might just take you up on that, said Jiraiya as blue chakra began to whirl into existence in his right hand. Forming an orb, the Rasengan then began to take a reddish tint and give off wisps of flames as it warped the air around it. Sage art, Hellfire Rasengan! Jiraiya shouted as he thrust a flaming ball of death towards Naruto's head. The Akatsuki member opened his blue eyes to look at Jiraiya as the Rasengan got ever closer, and time seemed to slow down for the older sage. The Hellfire Rasengan dispersed centimeters from Naruto's face, preventing the technique from incinerating his body and the surrounding 100 feet, though Jiraiya's momentum kept him moving forward to deliver a powerful and heated slap to the middle of Naruto's face. Being in sage mode as he was, Jiraiya's slap still sent Naruto flying and left a red palm print across his face that would have been comical in any other circumstance. If Naruto hadn't been using as much natural chakra as he could without showing signs of it, the slap would have broken his spine and crushed his skull. You weren't in sage mode, and you weren't going to dodge that, said Jiraiya. You were legitimately prepared to die there. Why? Naruto slowly got to his feet, staggering a bit before catching himself, subconsciously taking in some natural chakra to speed up the healing process. The plan is in motion already, and you're the only ninja still alive who could stop it before the cycle of Akatsuki's rule is established. If my death is what it takes to ensure that pain doesn't happen again, I'm more than willing to give my life. Jiraiya smiled sadly. So it seems this is what the old toad was talking about. I can see your logic, and I was never destined to come up with the answer myself. I'll trust the future to you, for now.